Oh, she's got. Ooh.
Oh, man. I never remember this.
Ooh. Well, we got some technical difficulties going on over here, so we'll wait a little bit.
Yeah, you can just leave it open. We'll figure it out. There we go. Safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wondered about that. I was going to bring that up. Yeah. Let's check in on it as we started. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever participated. So for consistency, it's a choice between the two.
Oh, okay.
Ask her. She can remember.
Yeah, let's see what's going on. Now, I think we're only talking. Well, I should look at the plans, but aren't we talking? Are we talking all the way to Pierce Street, or is it to Gateview? Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. 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 I don't think it matters, but I think I've got my old proximity chart. Yeah, both of you. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for reminding me. That one. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome to the Transportation Commission meeting of December 18th, 2018. And we're going to start out with the roll call.
Commissioner Reeves.
Present.
Commissioner Javendel.
Present.
Commissioner Chomsky.
Present.
Vice Chair Del Rosario.
Present.
And Chair McCroskey.
Present. Thank you. We got minutes in advance from last meeting. Are there any comments or questions from commissioners on the minutes? Okay. Do I ask for public comment on the minutes, or do we just, no, we keep it up here, right? So, can I get somebody to move that we adopt the minutes?
I move that we adopt the minutes from last October
Susan moves.
25th.
Okay. Can I get a second?
Second.
Robert seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? No? Passes. Now we have public comment, and this is for items that are not otherwise on the agenda this evening. You have the opportunity to speak for up to 3 minutes on items that concern you about transportation and the safety thereof around Albany. Bill, please.
Mr. Chair, we have one comment card, a speaker card, and then a person asked me to convey a message to you. Kay here is telling us that a speed bump is necessary on Talbot, the 900 block of Talbot, and that she had a note from her neighbor to attend this evening to convey the message. And we'll get back to that neighborhood to make sure that we follow up with them and provide them the information they need to start that process.
Great. So staff will follow up. Terrific.
And then a comment card from Mahmoud I'm not going to pronounce your last name correctly. So, above Lunar? Okay, thank you. You're welcome to go to the podium.
Well, why don't you come up to the podium over here so that everybody in the room can hear you, and in general, you would address the commission. If you could put the microphone up closer to your face, that would be appreciated.
Sure. I guess I pressed the green button?
No, it'll be pressed for you. Go ahead and just start talking.
Sure. I only have a couple of seconds of comment. I live on the Cornell Avenue between Marin and Solano, and I've noticed that the vehicle traffic, often seems too fast and too dangerous, in my opinion. I don't know what kinds of solutions I might advocate, but those are my observations. Thank you.
Great, thank you. You said the 900 block.
Between Marin and Solano, I don't know which block, but I'm on 9 something.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm sure you know me. I'm Amy Smolens with Albany Strollers and Rollers, and since a lot of you folks are here at Traffic and Safety or Transportation Commission, and the people at home figure you probably walk and bike, and now it's getting dark around 5 o'clock or so. Just want to let you know that we have these lovely and practical reflective bands, so you can use them to flip around your pants leg or around your arm. They slap around and they're super, super reflective. And the French restaurant Rendezvous helped us with funding, so we only require a $3 donation per. So if anyone wants them, you can get them through our website or email me, and I can leave them in my porch as I always do. So if anyone wants them, drop me a line. Thanks.
Do you have them with you tonight?
I do have them.
So if somebody wants them, they could grab you and pull you out into the foyer?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Anyone else for general public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to the, do we want to bring up the letters or I don't know how to address the letters that we received that were general, but we all got them. If somebody wants to bring them up and make them a future agenda item, we can address them then. So we'll move on to 4.1, the monthly police data on collisions and citations.
Good evening. We have 2 months worth of new data to report on, October and November. The pedestrian collisions were 2 in October and 3 in November. Bicycle collisions were 0 for both months. Vehicle collisions for November, total collisions 21 and 12 in October, November, and then injury collisions were 6 for both of those months. Citations were 64 citations were issued in October for moving violations and 52 in November, and DUI arrests were 8 and 6 for those months, respectively.
Any questions from the commission?
Question. I think we asked this before, and I just can't remember the answer, but does Albany Police Department or someone else analyze the specific incidences to note if there are any trends or commonalities, or do the police make recommendations based upon the type of incident that happens to say, hey, city, you guys should probably be doing something different at this location?
We often share when we get reports that people contact us regarding enforcement matters. We'll share it back and forth, and they'll contact us if there's more physical design issues that they hear about. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a recent example where the police department came to us and said, here's a situation that really needs attention based on their observations. It usually tends to be more citizen observations that we respond to. But we do meet with the police department on a pretty regular basis on transportation-related things.
Okay. Thanks.
That included it for information based on previous discussion were a couple items regarding regulations for, it came up in safety discussion. Oh no, I think it was mobility. Never mind. I'll do it on the next item.
All right. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay.
Maureen Crowley, Kains. Just a few days ago, we were rear-ended on the entrance to the freeway on Buchanan. The car in front of us stopped because of a red light.
Jeff.
We were stopped because of a red light, and this idiot comes plowing into the back of us. And it seems to me, ever since we've had the stop sign, that, temperamental is the wrong word, it comes alleged to keep the pace with the flow of traffic onto the freeway, it's more problematic. Every time which is regularly, I go on that entrance onto the freeway, there's always some fool who goes into the three-car, only area, and they don't have even just one person in the car, and just three. And I came through Ashby this morning. They have a really nice, big, bright orange sign for warning people, hey, ahead, there could be a red light, and gives some warning to people not familiar with the neighborhood, well, that we are familiar, to see that there could be a light straight ahead, because people accelerate because they're trying to get onto the freeway, then there's a red light. And this is what this idiot did to us. And I'm not saying don't have that red light there. What I'm saying is it'd be nice to have some more visible at that junction of Buchanan and the on-ramp. It has a nice big bright orange signage like they have on the Ashby entrance going north, which I was at this morning. Because obviously this person didn't see any sign and just plowed into us, even though 2 cars ahead of him stopped because of the red light. That plus the people who try to speed ahead by having one person in the car when there's a, what's it called, the carpool lane, where you might have at least 3 people. I would love the police to catch some of them, I really would. It really angers me that they do this all the time. They zigzag around. And that's what happened to us just a few days ago. So it's fresh on my brain. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment on the data? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Any closing comments or opinions? Harry?
I'm curious whether the sign that Maureen was referring to is a Caltrans sign or a city sign. Do you know?
If it's on the Caltrans on-ramp, it would have to be a Caltrans sign. And based on the comments about the carpool lane violation and the on-ramp, it's the westbound on-ramp, is that correct? Getting on towards Oakland, San Francisco? Yes, okay. I guess it would be something that, getting in touch with Caltrans and saying, hey, can you upgrade the advanced signage would be good. I would comment that I've noticed the same thing for the eastbound metering lights, that they're over the crest of the rise on the on-ramp, so it's actually hard to see whether they're on until you get up there, and if there's cars stopped, there's not a lot of reaction time if someone's getting up to speed, so that might benefit from some more advanced warning, maybe an activated sign.
Well, I would actually say that eastbound, there are advanced lit signs that say meter on.
Yeah.
And I find that southbound or westbound, coming from westbound Buchanan, you can't actually see the metering lights until you accelerate around the corner.
Right.
So I found that the eastbound one is actually better. Personal experience may vary. Any other comments?
I did want to make an observation about the DUI chart. I think I remember at this commission some months ago commenting on a sharp drop in the number of DUIs and maybe speculating that it was related to more people using Uber and Lyft type services after they've been out drinking, and that this was possibly a permanent benefit. Based on what we see here, I'm not so sure. It looks to me like we're just seeing random fluctuations in the small numbers, and there definitely was one spike. I don't know what happened there, but But other than that spike, it seems like we're just in the status quo. So little disappointing to those of us who had thought that the TNCs were providing a real benefit to society that way. But
Just looking quickly at the data, there are actually sort of rises in the March-May area, both in 16 and in 17, and a different pattern this last year. And then it's lower in the January area in both 17 and 18. Now I'm a little scared. If it's this high this time of year, how's it going to get in March or May? Well, keep an eye on it. All right. If that's all, we'll move on. Thank you, staff, for that. And we'll move on to the next item, which is the shared mobility programs. And I assume this is a general update.
That's correct. We have some more updated numbers from Gig Car Share. They did see a drop in October. We don't have information from them. I've asked for details if they saw similar trends in neighboring jurisdictions or if they have an explanation, and we don't have the November month yet to know if that continues. The Lime bike share continues to drop. They are also, I changed what I provided on this slide a little bit from last month to show the number of bikes. There was a comment on the number of bikes is really leading the number of rides dropping, and we have seen a drop in the number of bikes. I inquired if they're going to make that a little more consistent, and they've essentially responded that they are moving out of the manual bike business. They're not purchasing more. They don't see the return on their revenue that they do with scooters and electric bikes, so they don't plan to be putting out more bikes.
Okay.
And based on the conversation last month, I provided in the packet some information on state rules regarding different versions of electric bikes and motorized or electric scooters. As some background information, we'll probably be discussing that more next year.
Okay. Questions from the commission?
So the electric scooter data, I think you guys mentioned last time we met that is people who are using the scooters in Albany, though they're not available in Albany. Is that correct?
They're not placing scooters in Albany, but as their data has shown, some people are riding them from elsewhere into town, and they've come and gone, but a few scooters at a time, I think max, but there have been a growing number of trips that have come into Albany.
And that's GPS tracking of a trip that either started or ended in Albany, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it maxed out at 110 or so in October, divided by 30, so 3 a day or something like that, 4 a day. I guess that's possible. I've never seen a scooter in Albany.
Is there any penalty to end a trip in Albany if it wasn't
I think there
picked up
should.
to them? Are they blocked?
We have not issued any
No.
enforcement actions to them. I don't.
Okay, so their terminology is they don't place them. They don't swear that they won't stop or start.
When they rebalance their scooters
Okay.
at night, when someone picks them up to charge or whatever,
Okay.
they're not going to place them out again the next day, I think, in Albany until we have a program where they're allowed here.
And that will go through you guys before it starts in the city, correct? Or go through us as a commission? Thanks.
Any more questions for the commission? Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, any closing remarks by commissioners? Right, thank you, Justin. And let's keep moving on. So we're moving on to our discussion and action items, possible action items. We're going to start with item number 5.1, Washington Avenue Traffic Calming Project. And we need to work out who is where, first of all, because we have at least, I know.
Oh, no.
Two of us.
So Fareed has recused himself in the past.
Okay.
And I was looking at our recusal map, and I think you need to recuse yourself as well.
I've recused myself from Washington, yeah.
Yep.
I do too.
So you
Are
still,
there three of
you
us
still have a
now?
quorum of 3, so the
Yes.
2 of us can step out and you can continue the item.
Okay.
So we will do that.
Thank you, and we'll let you know.
To be clear, this is because we both live too close to the project.
Thank you. Jeff.
Yes, I'd like to start the staff report. I'll then turn it over to Robert, and then Robert will turn it over to our consulting team. I wanted to start with just a little bit of the context of history. I think most of the people in the room probably know this, but just to refresh everybody's memory, the city's discussions about this area began in 2011 when residents first approached the city regarding issues of speeding, blocked sidewalks, cut-through traffic, and general concern about the roadway in that neighborhood. In 2012, we applied to UC Berkeley Transportation Center, and they agreed to conduct a pedestrian safety assessment for the city. In 2013 and 2014, in 2013, a stop sign was installed at Polk in Washington, and temporary barriers were placed at Gateview to evaluate the feasibility of some of the traffic calming measures. In 2014, a recommendation was presented to the City Council, and the Council gave direction to red curb portions of Washington Avenue, install a raised crosswalk at Catherine's Walk, and install bulb outs. Before that council action was implemented, residents in the neighborhood came back and expressed opposition and concern about some of those elements and suggested an alternative involving parking turnouts, where we would reduce the size of the width, I should say, of the sidewalk and try to squeeze in as much street parking as possible. That alternative was presented first to you and then reached in 2017 and then reached council in January, in meetings in January and February of this year. And the council took some action, which I will now turn over to Robert to explain, who's now picking up the design process and we're working with Kittleson on this phase of the project.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Kittleson was awarded a design contract in February of 2018, and we've been working with the Kittleson team and Mr. Lewis on those design elements that were approved by council in February of 2018. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Mr. Lewis. He's going to go through the council action, council motion, and direction to staff, and then walk you through the design.
I think you should still be up there if you just switch over.
While he's doing that, good evening, Commissioners. Lawrence Lewis with Kittleson Associates. As Robert said, we're completing the design for Washington Avenue. We were also involved in the prior work from 2014 to 2018 in evaluating some of the options for improvements as well. So to recap, one of the primary purpose of the project that we're talking about today is really to look at designing and potentially implementing traffic calming and pedestrian safety improvements following the City Council direction from February of this year. So these are the items that were identified. First one, raised crosswalk at Catherine's Walk. The direction was for design and construction. Speed humps between Polk and Cerrito along Washington Avenue. Again, the direction was for design and construction. Painted bulb outs at the Cerrito Avenue intersection for design only, or only design was specified, and gate view design and implementation was specified for that location. Fourth item is an ordinance authorizing the closure of the northern sidewalk to pedestrians between Pierce and Cerrito so that vehicles can use that space for parking. Fifth item is a parking enforcement program between Pierce and Cerrito, so the entire length of the project. Striping, signage, and sidewalk barriers, particularly for the north sidewalk that will be closed. And then at some point in the future, a parking occupancy survey to understand how the street is functioning. And so with this, our current effort related to design has focused on these 4 items, recognizing that the other items, the ordinance, the survey, and the enforcement will be in the hands of the city in the future. So I'd just like to walk through these 4 items for the presentation. And for orientation, this is a site plan or a map of the corridor. It's 3 blocks of Washington Avenue, so from Pierce Street on the west end to Cerrito Street on the east end. The first item is a raised crosswalk at Catherine's Walk, and do you all have, as handouts, copies of the plans? Okay. So yeah, these are just excerpts from those plans. And so for this, this element is one that has been pretty consistent throughout discussions, and so design plans just include signage and a raised crosswalk per city standards at Washington. The second element, speed humps. 2 speed humps have been placed between Polk and Cerrito, with the placement generally to avoid conflicts with driveways. And again, the idea is that these are consistent with city design details for speed humps, and that there would be signage placed in front of both. For the painted bulb outs, there are 2 that were identified in the City Council direction. For Gateview, the bulb out is on the northeast quadrant, so it essentially realigns Gateview to intersect Washington Avenue at a 90-degree angle. There's also a crosswalk across Washington on the left side, or the western leg of the intersection as well. For the Cerrito intersection, there is also a painted bulb out that we have designed, and the bulb out is realigning Washington. So as you're coming around the curve and down to Cerrito, realigning that movement so that you're intersecting Cerrito at more of a 90-degree angle. In the reverse direction, if you're coming from San Pablo and going west along Washington, then the bulb out requires more of a 90-degree turn from Cerrito onto Washington to continue west. One element that we also included in the design is additional stop control. Since the intersection right now is one large intersection and would become more spread apart, we have added stop signs so that if you are going along Washington, you stop before turning left and then stop again before continuing onto Washington again. Touching on the signage for the closed crosswalk or the closed sidewalk, there's several locations along the north side of Washington where there will be signs placed just indicating that the sidewalk is closed and to use the other side of the street. Those locations are both mid-block and at intersections. Some additional items that were considered. These items look back at some of the prior work from 2014 to 2017. Bulb out at the Polk intersection, paving of Washington is part of the City Council direction, not part of our design at this point. No parking on Washington was identified as an option, but not supported because of the community desire to maintain some parking as we have with the design plans. Many traffic circles were identified initially as part of the traffic calming improvements, but were not supported by the community in part because, or in large part because of the parking loss associated with those. So those weren't moved forward as well. And then the other item that was considered was a bulb out on Washington Avenue at Gateview. So while our current design has Gateview realigned to T into Washington at a 90-degree angle, we did at one point look at realigning Washington so that there would be more of a deflection as you're traveling east-west along Washington. At the time, that was not supported by the community members because of the parking loss that would be associated on the south side of the street. So just wanted to mention these items as well in terms of items that had been considered previously. And so with this, I'll turn it over to Robert to talk through the action for you today.
So Mr. Lewis is here for obviously to answer questions before we get to the commission action, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So, commissioners, any questions?
I wanted to ask about the sidewalk closed signs. You mentioned they're at intersections and mid-block. So can you explain what the relation, like, is there a situation where a sidewalk is open for part of the block and then closed when you get to mid-block, or is the sidewalk closed for an entire block?
The sidewalk is closed for an entire block, but at locations, for instance, at Gateview, where you might be crossing, say, Washington on the north side of the street, but then you can't continue past that, then there would be a sidewalk closed sign so that people don't continue. So,
Can you say that one more time? I didn't quite follow.
this is probably a better example. So, for instance, at Gateview, there's a crosswalk that's provided so that you can cross Washington if you're continuing on Gateview. But with that, you cannot continue east-west along Washington because the sidewalk is closed. And so there's signage, to indicate that condition.
Okay, but that's at the intersection.
That's
Can you give an example of a place where a sidewalk closed sign occurs mid-block?
This is an example between Polk and Cerrito, and it's really there just as a reminder.
Just to reinforce.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you, reinforce.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we weren't in a situation where you'd be happily walking on a sidewalk and then see the sidewalk closed sign and suddenly have to cross mid-block. Okay, thanks.
I think you showed us one of the signs with the pedestrian and the arrow at the bottom. I'm looking at the Washington Avenue sheet, number 11. And it looks like they're two different signs.
So sheet 11 is the western end of the corridor at Pierce Street. So there is a sign at Pierce as you're entering Washington that just says sidewalk closed ahead, cross here. It does not have the pedestrian symbol. It just says before you go any further or attempt to go any further along Washington, cross here.
Great. It was coming out fuzzy in my.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. I guess I'll keep talking. Nobody else is leaping in. How many parking spaces are lost at Gateview due to the north side bulb out proposed? We're on sheet 12, I guess. For those of you following along in your hymnals.
So the bulb out is painted. So while there would be some materials to direct traffic around it, there's nothing actually preventing someone from inching into that space to park if they desired.
So it won't be red curbed?
There was no plans with police to red curb the bulb outs.
Okay. Thank you.
The only thing that's going to demark the existing current north side sidewalk as not a sidewalk would be the signage and the change in the municipal code. Is that correct? There's no other physical improvement or any change to the
Correct.
area? Okay.
Harry, have you got any questions? Or?
Yeah, well, I was just a little curious about the idea of parking in the bulb out. So we expect that people will enter the supposedly forbidden part of the bulb out and park several cars in a row and maybe even do a parallel parking maneuver within that region that's marked as with the dots here as being the bulb out?
Yes, it's.
And then when they exit that region, they won't be following exactly so like for example, if we go to page 15, so if someone is arriving from the top right of the page and they wanted to continue, so they're coming down Cerrito and they want to turn right onto Washington, normally they have to actually stop at the stop sign and then make a right turn. But if they are choosing to park somewhere in that zone, they can kind of inch over to the right, park, and then inch out of their parking space onto Washington, and they've never actually gotten to the stop sign. They've kind of bypassed the stop sign.
Correct.
So
Okay.
let me interrupt here. So you'll see on the slide that this is the intersection that is not being proposed for construction at this point. There was a good amount of debate over this topic in front of council in February.
Okay.
The direction was to design it and then essentially table it so it would not go through to construction.
Okay.
But that doesn't answer your question.
I think I'm just raising a potential concern. I'm not sure that it's a big concern, but I just wanted to.
Sure, and to add on to that, I have had one conversation with police and asked them to review just how that traffic would flow. They have a concern that entering into a bulb out is essentially a violation. It's not an allowed movement, so they would have. They want to look at carefully how that would be implemented themselves. So perhaps we have to sit down with police one more time to make it clear what our intentions are.
Okay.
I saw the parking survey, and so that shows about a 64% on average occupancy, and that looks like that's both sides of the street of Washington. So with the change, do we exceed 100% parking occupancy, assuming the same number of vehicles park on the street?
We did not look specifically at that data.
We didn't, yeah, we haven't, I could study that for a minute and see if we can figure out what the occupancy rate would be with reduction of parking spaces, if you like.
That'll be good. Thank you.
Were other emergency services, specifically the fire department, consulted on this plan?
Yes, the fire department was consulted in January and February of this year. We actually drove an engine up to the top of the hill and opened up the wings, or opened up the doors to confirm that there was room with, as the recommendation holds, with mounted parking on the north side and curbed parking on the south side. Or I should say, street parking on the south side and mounted parking on the north side. There was room for the engine, so they were satisfied with that design.
And did they see the design for the bulb out at Gateview?
Yes, they did.
Great. Thank you. Are there any other questions from commissioners? With that, I think we'll open it up to public comment. So if you could step aside for just a moment. So I know there's been a lot of back and forth on this online and through email. We want to hear all of your comments. We're going to have about 3 minutes per person. Have there been comment cards turned in? We do ask that you do fill out comment cards. And so once you bring those up now, up to the staff here, and we'll get you through in a timely and orderly manner.
Would you like me to call them out or pass them on to you?
Could you call them out?
Sure.
That would be great.
No. We start with while you're up.
By the way, we ask that you hold your applause. You know, a little, rumbling is okay, but let's keep it low, sub-vocal, so that we can keep this meeting moving and hear everything that everybody is saying. And you only get 3 minutes, so let's use that time effectively.
Could I put this on the Gateview one, or could you put this on the Gateview intersection one, please? Hi, good evening. My name is Noyola. I live at 808 Washington, which is on the south slope of Washington. So my biggest concern, I appreciate all the work that's done. My biggest concern is that I feel that the intersection, as it's proposed currently at Gateview, is still insufficient for calming traffic. My sense is that, and I'll point here, hopefully you can hear me, traffic is still coming down the hill from here, right? And from here, from the top of Catherine's Walk all the way to Pierce is 500 feet. The other improvements, all the speed humps, the stop signs, are each about 100 feet apart. So our biggest issue, my biggest issue, I think there's several of my neighbors down the hill here, closer to Pierce, are concerned that this is insufficient to actually slow traffic down. If you'll recall, we've actually had cars flipped over that they've gone so fast at this intersection, either up the hill or down the hill as they're cutting across. Mr. Gonzalez has suggested that the improvements that are proposed for up the hill will be sufficient. Will be sufficient to slow traffic down. I don't feel that that's enough. I don't feel that that's enough. I would propose, especially after what Mr. Lewis just said, that people are going to be able to park on the sidewalks, on the bulb outs, that why not look at the original concept back again, which was to look at the bulb out on the south side. And if not that, then what's stopping us from creating stop signs at this intersection at Gateview and El Cerrito? Otherwise, my sense is that this is a good plan generally. I feel that I'm supportive of speed humps. I'm supportive of actually the intersection at Cerrito as well, if that could eventually get improved. Supportive of the parking. I think that's been very well thought out with a lot of community support. But again, the issue is the going down the hill as well as going up the hill. People are moving very fast. There's a lot of kids down the way. We have a lot of neighbors down there. Just recently, we've had one car was hit recently going up the hill. As they come down Pierce from Richmond, they turn very quickly up the hill, cutting across to San Pablo, and our cars get hit, our mirrors get hit. And this is, anybody that lives down in that area will tell you exactly that this happens on a regular occurrence. Again, the main thing is, plan is great. Let's work on this particular intersection at Gateview, particularly if it's not going to steal any or remove any traffic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jeff, have you got more cards?
Deb Dinherd?
We will spell your name correctly, but we can't always promise that we'll pronounce it right.
Thank you. So, thank you for all the work and for really trying to work with us to get something that works. You know, a lot of this is much better than what was seemed to be proposed several years ago. And the bulb out, both of the bulb outs, to my understanding, are significantly different from what we, the neighborhood, thought was going to happen. And so, I know it's difficult, but I just wonder, can we sit down somehow and have a give and take? I really believe everyone's trying and doing their best, but this forum of kind of, we talk and then we only have a couple of minutes to give you our feedback and then you have to make a decision. We need a kind of a back and forth, I think. So, could we have an informal meeting where we hash this through a little bit? And I apologize if maybe the neighborhood should have come back and met with Mr. Gonzalez in between so that this wouldn't have happened. I apologize that we didn't get that together and think that because we're thinking hopefully that it's kind of going to happen the way we imagine it. And then when we come and see the drawings, we realize it isn't. And these are all really important to us in the neighborhood. So if there's a way we can just have an informal meeting, a give and take, Noe is a professional at this exact activity, and Chris Kent has a lot of background in similar projects. And I just feel like if we could sit down and hash it through, that would be a lot more productive than this sort of a one-way, slow approach. And I also really appreciate, Robert, your asking about the parking. The other night, my husband had no parking within several blocks, and it's really disturbing. So thank you.
Deb, before you step down, was there something in particular about the plans as presented tonight that you would prefer not to go forward? Because that wasn't clear to me from what you said.
So both of the bulb outs are different from what we had understood them to be. I thought there would be no bulb out at all at Cerrito, and the gate view was understood to be different than and closer to what Noe was talking about than what happened. The sidewalk issues, I believe, are as expected, and then the last question would be about how much parking is actually getting lost.
Okay.
Thank you.
Maurice Simmons, did I get that right? Maureen, I'm sorry.
My name is Maureen Simmons, and my husband and I live on Washington, and we've been following this for years, and actually we're pretty happy with the way it's going here. The fact that you're trying to save our parking in front of our house for us is great. The concern that we have is, as shared by other people here, is the speeding in the area, and I think a lot of this is going to help with that. But one thing I wanted to bring to it is what we've noticed since Marin was redone and lanes have been restricted on Marin, there's a lot more traffic coming off the freeway, coming over Solano Avenue to get into town because they don't want to have to deal with Marin. And it's to the point now in the morning that in the morning commute, there's such a steady stream of cars coming over the hill, we can't pull out of our street. We have to go around the other way to leave our house. And so anything that this plan can do that can help mitigate that would also be great. I just want to put that out there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Francis Chapman.
Francis Chapman, 800 block of Washington. Thank you for the plan. Generally speaking, I think it captures a lot of the concerns we had with not losing parking. One small question was whether on the north side there was going to be a 3-foot line to help people who are mounting the curb know how far off they can be into the street, because that would help preserve the width. The other point I had was just around Noe's point on Gateview. I don't want to slow the project down, but at the same time, if there is opportunity to improve that intersection, definitely would be interested in participating in that. Thank you.
I do not have any more speaker cards.
Does anybody else wish to speak about this item from the public? All right. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission.
If I can have some follow-up questions about process. based upon the public comment. So what are we recommending to the council tonight? And is it a concept? And what level of detail? And then what are the opportunities for the neighborhood to weigh in again?
So this is the design process. This is no longer at the conceptual level. In terms of opportunities, we can open this up to a public forum. We have time to have a public meeting if that's necessary. Council gave us direction in February as the designs are shown, so we proceeded with that. But given the public comment, we can certainly take other direction if it doesn't seem appropriate.
So you're roughly, what, at 65% or so?
That seems about right, yes.
So now's the time. So one more iteration and we're pretty close.
Now is the
that.
time to, now that we have these comments in front of us, now is the time to think about whether to implement them.
Okay. And it seems like, if I may, and it seems like from the comments that I've heard that we're pretty darn close to a design that's going to work for the neighborhood, probably with some refinements that seem about right to do at a 65% level. I mean, we can't go beyond this, so I think we have to make this fix now. So I'm hoping that opportunity will exist. So at 65%, what are we bringing back to council? It sounds like there's an action here, but it also seems like council already has an understanding that this project is moving forward since we're at 65% design.
So in the absence of comment, this would be a recommendation to approve the drawings as they're shown. But in the presence of comments, we can certainly address those and then take it to council.
So in the absence of comments, you guys would proceed all the way to bid set document, come back to commission or council for approval?
In the absence of comments, I wouldn't see a reason
you wouldn't.
to come
Okay.
back to commission.
Okay, got it. Okay, so that's great that we're following process. So I don't know how you want to take comments from us to further review designs or have another outreach session or whatever it may be. I can see what the other commissioners would like to do. But it seems like there's probably one more level of iteration to take on some of the comments for refinement before we go to final approval of the design set.
Seems approximately right. Let's see how far we get.
I'm trying to kind of identify the spots that were called out by the public as being not what they were expecting tonight, and it seems like there were really the two bulb out areas are the spots that we heard about, and one of them we've already heard is not intended to be built at this time. It's kind of an idea. So can we just stop developing that design, leave it at the point that it's at, and think of it as a potential future project?
That design is fundamentally done. Anything built on top of that would simply be details, specifications.
So there's no reason. I'm just wondering if we can maybe take that off the table for future discussion. Even if you were to have a meeting with the residents, could we make it more efficient by just asserting that bulb out that's not going to be built is not something that we need to discuss anymore because it's not being built?
I agree.
If it gets to the point where it's going to be built, then we'd have the discussion. The one that is going to be built, the one at Gateview, is the more critical one. And I think if there were going to be a neighborhood meeting, it would make sense to focus on that intersection. And there were several different treatment ideas that we heard about it, and I think it would be nice for the people who live there to have another chance.
Yes, and I think in anticipation of that, I think staff needs to have one more conversation with police to clarify their plan to enforce issues around the bulb outs, whether they're going to see issues with entering and exiting of bulb outs. As proposed on the south side, it would be a straight shot through a bulb out, if they're
It
not
would
going
be,
to take it
it would
that
be
way.
even more tempting for people to drive through the
That's
bulb out
correct.
as a through route.
That's correct.
Well, that's certainly something that would need to be discussed. I did want to ask another question. Someone brought up whether there was going to be a stripe on the street indicating the boundary between the parking zone and the driving zone. And if I'm looking at the plans correctly, those stripes are included. Is that right?
Yes, that was a recent addition. We added those stripes. I believe it's 3 feet on the north side and 7 feet on the south side. You're looking at sheet 11?
11.
I'm looking at sheet 11. I think it's on several of them. So I hope that addresses the concern that we heard from somebody about people knowing how far up the sidewalk they need to go.
So that was, to clarify, that was based on street measurements we did back in February. So we went curb to curb, we measured it out, and then we determined 3 feet and 7 feet would still be sufficient to move a fire department engine through the street. Not much else.
Okay.
I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at the, I think it's the staff report and the staff recommendation on the second of 13 pages. There's sort of an A through F list. And I think, the first one is, A is raised crosswalk at Catherine's Walk, not St. Catherine's Walk. I'm going to get that right one of these days. And that seems to be pretty, we didn't have any comment on that. No issues have been raised. B is speed humps. Again, similar. C is the issue of bulb outs at the two intersections. We've already talked about how one of those isn't going to be implemented. So to me, C is still an open question. D is an ordinance supporting sidewalk parking, or decommissioning, I should say. E is enforcement, and F is striping, signage, and barriers. I think we could move forward with everything except for C at this point fairly easily, unless other commissioners have objections to that. Let me just take one more look at my list of public comment. Yeah. So perhaps the thing to do is to move the design forward with the exception of the Gateview intersection design, and ask staff to work with the public a bit more.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right to me.
If I may, Mr. Chair, with respect to working with the neighborhood, is this something that the commission would like to be a part of as a commission meeting, or would you like us to do it more informally?
Well, we had a request from the public for it to be less formal. There have been a series of fairly informal meetings. I think that's worked pretty well. I know I've attended those and listened. That's worked out well for me. Any other comments?
If there's I don't know how we would define it, but if there's a design element that's radically different from what was presented to the commission, then maybe we'd want to see that back again.
Yes, I understand.
Do you want to give someone one more chance to speak?
Do you have something quick? You're going to need to come to the microphone.
You mentioned.
Please come all the way to the microphone.
You mentioned parking, figuring out how much parking would be lost and whether it would be 100%. Is that going to, and then you mentioned approving 65%. Will you be looking at the parking issue before you approve that 65%, or? Does that make sense?
I couldn't, in response to Commissioner Del Rosario's question earlier, I did some quick math here. So looking at the stretch of Washington from Cerrito to Pierce, kind of the key segment there, there are 44 parking spaces. In the 2 evening surveys that we did recently, there were 28 of those 44 were occupied. The rule of thumb is that if 85% of the parking spaces are occupied, it's full, it feels full. People have to travel a undesirable distance to park. The 85% level is 37 spaces. 85% of 44 total is 37 spaces, if you follow. So full capacity is 37 of the 44 spaces occupied. We observe 28 of the 44, leaving a net right now of 9 available in that segment. So there's a little bit of cushion based on the 2 snapshots. Not a lot, but a little bit of cushion in that area that could absorb the spaces that we need to take out.
And if I may add, since we're so far along in the process with design, the roadway and the right-of-way are just so narrow that we just can't have everything right on the street. And so you have safety elements, you have parking on the sidewalk, you have 12 or 13-foot roadway for vehicles to come through, and you have parking on one side of the street. We probably can't make those type of adjustments without significantly changing some of the safety or traffic calming elements that the neighborhood wants. So given the numbers that the staff has put forward, I think that at least I'm content with how that calculates out.
Can I add to that? So since I believe the beginning of design, the intersection, the bulb out at Polk was removed because of parking concerns. The bulb out at Cerrito was removed due to parking concerns. Parking is allowed, as it is now. It will continue to be allowed on Washington. And I think there's an open question about whether we'll be meeting with police about parking in the bulb out at Gateview. So I don't see any net loss of parking at this point with this design.
Okay.
Anything else? No? Okay. Shall I move? Anybody else prepared to formulate something?
I can, let's see, what are we asking for in our?
So the staff recommendation is staff recommendation is for us to provide a recommendation to council to approve designs for the Washington Avenue traffic calming project and amend the municipal code to permit parking in the parkway on the north side of Washington Avenue as designated by signage and striping. So I would just modify that to pull the Gateview intersection design and include the issue of parking in the bulb out, and ask staff to coordinate or to meet with the neighbors and then come back to this commission.
Staff can do that.
Shall we make that a motion?
I think so. That would.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody who attended on this item and spoke or didn't, but just attended. And we will keep the meeting moving. So let's have Fareed and Susan back in. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
So we're moving on to item 5.2, the Kains and Adams Bikeway and Traffic Calming Pilot Project. If you think you're going to be speaking in public comment on this, if you could fill out a comment card and go ahead and deposit that with Jeff here at the end. Thank you. Something's wrong. It's too easy.
So I'll do a brief introduction and then hand it over to Andrew Lee, our consultant with Parisi Transportation Consulting. This project comes back to before the commission after its discussion last fall when the commission reviewed the study for bicycle facilities on both Kains and Adams as parallel routes to San Pablo Avenue, implementing 2 projects within the active transportation plan. The council discussed last December and asked that the Traffic and Safety Commission develop a recommendation for a pilot program for this project with some options for council regarding the scope. In particular, the council asked for guidance on duration and evaluation metrics as part of the pilot program. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrew Lee to walk through. We're presenting design drawings for the pilot treatment and can discuss further.
Great. Good evening, Commission. This is Andrew Lee with Parisi Transportation Consulting.
Welcome back.
Thank you. It's been a long journey. Quick recap, project kicked off in 2012 as part of the city's active transportation plan, and Parisi started working on this in late 2017, taking forward the ATP concept to see what our options were, what the community wanted in terms of analysis and resolution of some issues identified related to traffic behaviors, high speeds, bicycle circulation patterns. The Traffic and Safety Commission recommended a concept in late 2017, which was reviewed and carried forward by the City Council to be a pilot project. And in the year since the City Council meeting, we have developed design drawings, which I'll be reviewing with you today. As a quick concept summary, let me just go through what the pilot project would entail. So this may seem familiar, but the vehicle entry to Kains would remain southbound only on the block. The vehicle entry onto Adams Street would remain northbound only for the blocks of the project extents. So this is the same exact condition that you are normally accustomed to. Kains would predominantly be southbound, Adams would be predominantly northbound. However, the change, one of the changes being proposed is that the vehicles would be allowed to travel in both directions within the block itself and to exit in both directions. And so I'll call your attention to the drawing, the plan view drawing. This is a plan view for Kains, and you'll notice that where there is currently a stop stencil in the middle of the street, it will now be placed over to the right-hand side of the street, and 2 concrete barriers will be installed on the left side of the street, which would prevent anyone from going northbound onto Kains. You'll have to use your imagination and flip all of the directions the other way if you're thinking about Adams, so I apologize if you live on Adams, but I had to use Kains as an example. Some of the other changes that would be proposed are removal of the pavement arrows and some of the signs that are currently installed, and I'll go through several photo simulations that illustrate what that would look like. And then marking the legal crosswalks at the intersection. Some of them do exist, some of them are not present, and so crosswalks would be installed at each of the intersections. Some of them would be actually high visibility crosswalks. Let me just add as well, as a consequence of allowing two-way vehicle traffic in the middle of the block, bicycle entry would be allowed in both directions of the block, and bicycle travel would be allowed in both directions of the block. But I will reiterate again that vehicle entry would again be predominantly southbound only on Kains and predominantly northbound on Adams. So this is a cross-section view of what the south end of Kains would look like. So this is what we would call as the far side of the intersection. If you were facing Kains looking north, this is just a different perspective of what was presented in the plan above. But you would see within the 30-foot cross-section, two barriers you'll notice that we have certain dimensions called out as an example of what the spacing would look like. We're reserving about 2 feet from the curb and about 5 feet between barriers. And the simulation looks a little bit different in recognition that there has been some debate as to what kind of barrier the community and the city would like to use for this pilot project. And then you'll notice as well that a sign, 2 signs in fact, would be placed within the barrier to reinforce the change, or actually it's not a change in the traffic circulation, but it is a permission for the bicycles to travel in both directions on each of these streets. So this is just using Kains as an example, what Kains looks like now. This is at the intersection of Washington, and this is facing north. So you notice the conditions from before. This is the cross section, also facing the same direction. The stop stencil in the middle of the street, existing signage with the one-way arrows and the do not enter signs. With the pilot project, the proposal is to put in the 2 traffic barriers, install the sign that says do not enter except for bicycles, and then actually to simplify some of the signs that you notice on the sides of the street. So whereas right now we actually have 8 signs, 2 one-way arrows in each direction, 2 do not enter signs, and then 2 stop signs facing the direction of traffic coming towards you. This would now be simplified to 1 stop sign for southbound traffic, which will be illustrated later, 1 do not enter sign except for bicycles, and then 1 no left turn sign facing eastbound traffic, 1 no right turn sign facing westbound traffic. This is Kains Avenue facing in the opposite direction, so under existing conditions, this is what it looks like. And the proposal is to, again, put in the traffic barriers, simplify some of the signs, and modify the striping. I also forgot to mention that part of the direction provided by the commission carried forward by City Council was to add right edge lines, so these being the 6-inch lines on the side of the street. There would be no changes to parking arrangements whatsoever. We would not be marking out parking spaces to the extent that there is already red curb in place at the intersection. There would be no expansion or modification to the no parking zones there either. The right edge lines are simply a matter of delineating what space is allocated for parking so that people don't encroach into the street. Okay, facing east, so this is coming from San Pablo, going towards the hill, in either direction really, if you're thinking Kains or Adams. You notice here the existing signage with the existing arrows to be simplified with barriers and fewer signs. And then going towards San Pablo, the existing signage, and then the simplification with the barriers and fewer signs. So that is what the proposal would most intensely be taking a form of at the intersections. At the mid-block locations, you would notice the edge lines, but there would not be any other proposals with the exception of shared roadway markings or sharrow markings, which would be installed in both directions of the street to remind drivers and bicyclists that bicycle travel is permitted in both directions. So in terms of practical impact to people living on both of these streets, the increase in vehicle traffic going in a direction you're not otherwise accustomed to would be relatively modest because no one would be able to enter Kains or Adams in the direction that isn't already permitted, but there could be people who are making three-point turns or coming out of their driveways and going in the opposite direction. And so there is some diligence required amongst the community that if you are indeed pulling out of a driveway or making any other maneuvers onto the street, to look in both directions rather than in one direction. We are also not including, as part of this plan, a proposal to put in any traffic speed humps yet. It was a option that was to be considered possibly after the pilot had been initiated. And the objective here is that with the right edge line striping and the two-way traffic being permitted, that some of the speed reduction would occur through that design. So we didn't want to go and jump straight to a speed hump. One item that I would like to call your attention to is that there are some barrier options still being considered, and I'm calling them barriers and not planters for a reason. I think, the direction that I received from City was that planters do require a bit of maintenance, and so the desire is to have something of lower maintenance. But I will just present these photos to you. These are barriers that are already in place in Berkeley that you may be familiar with. There are more temporary measures that include just basic temporary traffic barriers and signage and reflectors that could be used as part of an option for implementation. A different kind of barrier in Portland, where it's unplanted, a little bit closer to what was shown in the plans, possibly of larger diameter than what we'd intend. And then a different take on what's already in place in Berkeley with the mosaic. And then ultimately, if the pilot project does reach its full life and there's a decision to extend that design, these are examples of what a more mature design would look like. So it would go beyond a movable barrier into something that could involve planting or simply just a more permanent installation of curbs and signs. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to council to ask any questions. The action that's requested out of council, or excuse me, out of commission tonight is approval of the design with possible modification. We are at a near final draft. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, questions for the commission?
Go ahead, Reed.
I was just going to ask, would you recommend that the barriers be bolted to the pavement, or they just be sitting there?
You know, I honestly think you have more experience with that. I feel like it's a little bit of a trick question. I wonder if you have experience with vandalism issues that you bring that up?
Well, in Berkeley, although they're fairly massive, we have had cases where people have moved them, which is why I ask.
Okay.
So not to turn it into a comment, but with the potential for that, if we want them to stay exactly where we put them, it seems like we should consider means of affixing them to the roadway so they're not so easy with, maybe a group of high school students to roll them to a different location.
Got it.
I hope they're not listening. Other questions?
We had a couple of written comment about the parking and how we're going to have people parking comply with the direction of the roadway and not have left side exit parking from your vehicle. Can you talk about that a little more and how you got to that conclusion?
Sure, and I'm going to ask for assistance from staff as well, but we did some research about what the California Vehicle Code says about parking on a two-way street, and the law does say that the right side wheel should be against the curb. We do have local and regional examples of where this policy is not being enforced, and From what I know, it appears to be a matter of enforcement priority to the local police department, if you have anything to add.
That's accurate, yeah. So we provided the state and city regulations regarding parking. There has been one instance where a city has gotten into the state regulations, a pilot program. So they saw it as necessary to amend state law before they permitted it. But besides that, I did not find any wiggle room within the regulations to formally permit that parking configuration.
Okay.
I have another question, which is probably more for city staff than for the designer. We were going to follow up on a couple of related issues about, first of all, checking these plans with the police and fire department, and also conferring with the Orientation Center for the Blind about future hopes of building a bridge across Cerrito Creek. Can you give us a status update on those discussions?
Sure. We discussed with the fire department, as was, I believe, presented in previous conversations. They generally prefer one-way traffic because they have a less chance of oncoming traffic not being able to move out of their way. So they didn't formally oppose the project, but they see that as slowing down response speeds potentially. Police, we discussed the enforcement earlier today after the writing of the memo, and they echoed some of the concerns that were outlined in the report of the options regarding people parking on the left side having reduced visibility to see oncoming traffic, pulling out when you're parking with the driver's side further away from the traffic. Regarding the Orientation Center, we've scheduled to sit down with them early next year, so we would be discussing that before we brought it to City Council per their direction. But if it influences traffic and safety's discussion of that, we could bring back results of that to you as well.
Susan? Okay. So I guess we'll open this up to public comment.
We have, I think, 13 speaker cards so far.
Okay.
Go ahead and start naming by threes, and
please.
3 minutes per speaker, I assume.
3 minutes.
Brian Martin, then Peter Dolman, and then Clay Larson.
Hi, my name is Brian Martin. I live on the 600 block of Adams Street. My family bikes a lot around town to school and elsewhere, and my older daughter is on the Albany High School mountain biking team, which often bikes on city streets to get to where they train. Having an official, legitimate bicycle boulevard at our front door, I think would be a great resource for us. As residents on Adams, I do want to see that happen. Of the options that were previously presented, I'm in favor of the one being proposed, which should have another benefit of reducing San Pablo spillover traffic from going wrong way that I see happening too often. To benefit the safety of my family and to complete the region's north-south bike routes off of San Pablo Avenue, I'm willing to experience some inconvenience, like having internal two-way traffic and minimal loss of parking if that ends up happening. I am very much in, about the bridge, I am very much in favor of a bridge across Cerrito, the creek at the north of Adams, and I want the city to vigorously pursue that, possibly with the help of Buffy Wicks, AD 15, whose district spans all these different jurisdictions that would have to get approval. But I do recognize that often the city does what it can when it can, and doesn't have to necessarily wait for every piece to be in place to do one piece. And so I don't think the bridge should hold this project up. Having said that I'm in favor of this, I am concerned that the city waited a year to revisit this item and then scheduled this vote before key pieces had begun, like testing with the fire department. In addition, requiring three-way turns on this narrow car-packed street for parking on one half of each block is dangerous, impractical, and a non-starter for me, if that's still part of it. I understand Berkeley has several streets like this item proposes that are somehow allowing wrong-way parking, and that seems to have worked for them for years, then that should be looked into. If there is a way to approve this item contingent on these certain issues being sorted out, I would say do that. Otherwise, I would ask the city to prioritize the resolution of any key issues that the commission sees still are unresolved, and schedule this item again as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Peter Dolman.
My name is Peter Dolman, on the 600 block of Adams. I appreciate one more chance to comment on this, and I like the painted crosswalks. They are definitely needed. Not all cars recognize unmarked crosswalks. I am deeply concerned about the effect of the plan has drawn on parking. There still seem to be legal questions about wrong-way parking. If we're going to have to deal with that by just not enforcing the law, it seems a lot easier to not enforce the law against bicycles going south on Adams. I am concerned that although this is a pilot project, there doesn't seem to be any way to evaluate it. There have been no criteria in any of the material that I've seen. I've heard talk about making the barriers as permanent as possible by bolting them down, which makes me wonder if it's really a pilot project. I haven't seen very many bicycles on Adams. Northbound, this plan doesn't really have much effect on northbound bicycle traffic. It enables southbound bicycle traffic. I see an occasional northbound bicycle, but not very many. Most of them ride on the sidewalks on San Pablo. There's no connection currently to any bikeway, either to the north or the south. I would guess that you'd have to go through the village, which I understand they discourage through traffic, to connect off San Pablo to the south to any bikeway. And there's a bridge past the Center for the Blind, which that's still a question until they approve. I can't imagine they'd be enthusiastic about silent vehicles going back and forth on their street. Anyway, I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
After Clay will be Maureen Crowley, Ed Fields, and Joe Fox.
Jeremy said I might try the economy. Is it light down as far as I can go? All right.
That's as far as it can be.
All right, and does a mouse work? Okay. This is going to be harder to see than I thought. Let's just try it.
Excuse me, Clay, could you at least point the microphone a little closer?
Right. Clay Larson, Albany residence. I sent a letter to the commission. Rather than trying to rehash that, I was going to try to discuss a point that I raised at a meeting a long time ago. And basically, the conclusion I've reached is that this project is silly. But so let's see. Doesn't seem to work. You got to imagine this. We're looking at the gap. It looks like a gap in the regional bike network, and we have. This is not working at all.
We can see when you move the mouse on the screen. So if you can talk into the microphone and move the mouse, then we can follow along. But you do have to talk into the microphone. Thank you.
I'm concerned that this is not working out very well. The question was, who's going to use, we're talking about spending $100,000, I think I priced this out correctly, for south-facing traffic on Adams. Who's going to use it? I submit that bike trips originating in the, on the hills to the west of Adams are not going to squander the gravimetric potential energy. They're going to move down whatever street they're on until they approach moving south. So they're not going to just take a beeline to Adams Street. Traffic east of Pablo Avenue is well served taking Kains. That's the most strict route. So that leaves traffic coming from Richmond and El Cerrito, and perhaps they were cycling on the harrowing Carlson Boulevard bikeway, or they were on San Pablo Avenue, and that eventually gets you to San Pablo Avenue. And there you have two choices as you enter Albany. Turns out that Kains Avenue actually has a T-junction directly into San Pablo Avenue. There's sharrows painted there already. It's great. So a bicyclist could simply, after about 50 feet, escape San Pablo Avenue and move on to Kains and move on south. Alternatively, the bike rider could ride another 275 meters, and this doesn't, down to Clay Street, and then go up the hill to Clay Street to get onto Adams. I submit nobody's going to do that. I submit that the reason we don't see too many south-facing, south-traveling bicyclists on Adams is because there's no reasonable way to get there. So I think this is a silly program. I think the solution which was recommended was simply allow north traffic on Adams to close the gap and south traffic on Kains to close the gap, and we're done. Throw some sharrows on there, we're good. We're good to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maureen Crowley, Kains. Compared to the functioning example of Cedar at Milvia, the ballards are too high. Who decided to root the plants? I heard about maintenance. This was not what the neighborhood wanted. Marin Avenue, a delineated bike route at Kains, there's only one ballard on your drawings, and they have one southwest bulb out. Where are the bulb outs on the other junctions on your plans? It's inconsistent. Why do we have to get stuck with two ugly things? They've only got one. For probably just a couple $100, all you had to do was write two words, except bicycles, onto each of the do not enter signs. That's all you had to do. Cyclists will still continue to cycle in whatever direction they want to, regardless of the signage, regardless of the hundreds of thousands of dollars you choose to spend. I don't see any of my neighbors doing actually 5-point turns onto the east side of Kains and then repeating this exercise in order to travel down south on Kains. It's just not going to happen. It's not safe. After this year pilot plan, assuming the need for modifications, these bollards or anything else, where will the money come from? What percentage has been put aside from this budget if adjustments to change and travel behaviors do not support this pilot program? Your pilot program states you will select 2 blocks for Kains and Adams to determine if the pilot plan is effective. Well, which 2 blocks will you select and why? For Kains, the obvious ones are the 900 block and the 500 block. Because north direction are both hitting either, God, I'm losing my train of thought here, Solano. Right now, it's hard to make a right from Kains going south on Solano. Imagine the Kains people going east, west, straight ahead, and the Kains north people going east and west, all at once, the buses and all the other traffic. It's insane, absolutely insane. Plus there's more traffic on the 900 block because it's a lot longer. And, hold on, I've lost my train of thought, sorry. I guess you got the gist. Most importantly, Parisi, a year and a half ago, I asked you very clearly, remove my photograph from your brochure. It has not been done. I don't care if you scribble out my face, I don't care if you put a dog picture on top of my face. I do not want my photograph on your brochure. Because the message is, the subliminal message is that I support this project, and I do not. And I really am offended after 1.5 years, you have not removed my photograph from your brochure. I want it gone before this new year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Ed Fields. I'm a Kains Avenue resident. My main concern about the way the project is being presented has to do with the barriers. You're, I guess, going to decide what they look like tonight because we don't really know. We have the simulation and we have the actual drawing. I'm concerned about the drawing that they're quite tall, they're ugly in my opinion, and they seem to block sight lines. I don't know if they're hollow and get filled up with trash. And I would certainly hope that after the pilot project that we end up with what was shown by the consultant, something like a 6-inch raised curb with some planting, rather than these sort of garbage can looking things. I don't understand why some of the barriers extend beyond the curb edge of the cross street. At Garfield and Kains, they stick out beyond the curb. At Portland, they seem to be in line with the curb. And at Washington, they seem to be about 5 feet inset into Kains Avenue from the curb edge of Washington. My other concern about the barriers has to do with actually getting approval from the fire department and the police department of the dimensions that are shown on the drawing. I mean, the location, the placement of the barriers, because I understand that the fire department looked at them, but I didn't read in the staff report that the fire department, tested it or whatever and approved of them. I would hope that they would at 17 feet. But I feel like if you approve the project, I mean, we've seen this in other cases, not necessarily a traffic project, but a project gets approved a certain way and then the fire department comes along and says, we can't have that. Doesn't work for us. And then the project is changed, because if we're going to have this two-way internal traffic on Kains and Adams, I want to make sure that there's no external traffic and that those barriers don't get moved so close to the curb edge that it's just seems reasonable for cars to go the wrong way. It says, yes, it says do not enter except bicycles. But I'd like us to know that the placement of the barriers is at least going to work. It's going to work for the pilot. I mean, and then we'll see if it actually works in practice. I think that's my main concern. I am happy to have a designated bike route on Kains where I live. I would have preferred a contraflow bike lane, but I recognize that this is the compromise that was, or the decision that was made by the commission and the council, and I hope it works. Thank you.
Thank you.
After Joe will be Mary and Preston Jordan.
Okay, hi, my name is Joe Fox. I live at 962 Kains Avenue. So I'm between Solano Avenue and Marin. And one of my concerns, the photos that were shown at areas that aren't as busy. And I welcome everyone to go to Solano Avenue and Kains and see what happens during the school time when the kids are out, when the seniors are crossing for the movie theater, and it tends to be a lot of seniors. I'm a pedestrian myself, so I already go up a block because it's so congested there. And I'm really concerned about that aspect of it. I think we need a secondary stoplight then, or at least a four-way stop at Solano and Kains Avenue. If there's going to be traffic exiting, it's already very difficult to cross there. I did a little bit of research. I'm glad you brought up Berkeley. In Berkeley, the north-south bike lanes and the bikeways are not the immediate block right away from the main thoroughfares. They're actually a secondary block away. So they're 2 blocks up. My concern is with the traffic whipping off of San Pablo, and they make a right on Kains. Once I did follow, because I do have a car too, the Hertz people get the cars washed, they swing around, they make a quick loop through because someone was speeding, so I followed them to where they came from. It was Hertz, and I talked to them. I talked to the manager there, and they said, well, that's the most convenient for them. So we have a lot of very fast traffic, and those streets 2 blocks up are 2-way. They're already 2-way. It just seems like it's a lot going on, and there's already a model in Berkeley, as you brought up the Berkeley model, that's set forth. So I'm really concerned, and I hope no one gets hit and killed. I also work at the trauma center and at Highland Hospital for over 20 years, and pedestrians in crosswalks, that is pretty much who I treat when they get hit by cars. So it is kind of horrifying. Wow. And I hope you can keep me and my neighbors safe and address that intersection appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mary D'Elia. I'm the executive director of the Albany YMCA, which is at 921 Kains Avenue, and it's located between Solano and Marin. And I'm just actually really getting a feel for what this project is. I'm trying to understand it a little bit more this evening. So one of the things that I just want to start with is we have 7 bike racks in front of our building, and we have a bike camp, and we have ride to work, ride to the Y weeks that go on. We're really big encouragers of people riding their bikes to the Y, whether they be employees or members, and big proponents of bike safety. And I'm just really questioning about the safety of this particular plan. I'm not quite sure it's the right one. The Albany Y, you may not know this, but we currently have 2,400 members in and out of that building. And a lot of them are encouraged to share rides and walk and ride, but a lot of them are seniors and a lot of them can't, so they are driving. And currently, southbound Kains Avenue is, as you all know, it's one way. There's one car going down the street. There's cars parked on both sides. And my concern is when it becomes 2-way internally in that block, people coming south on Kains are going to want to make a U-turn and find a parking space on the other side, because parking, as you know, is a premium. We have classes that are scheduled from 6 a.m. in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, and a lot of our entering of the building is around timing. So people are rushing to get parking. So that's one of my concerns is right now you have 1 lane of cars going, and if it becomes 2 lanes and a bike corridor and parking on 2 sides, does that narrow street accommodate all of that activity? And that's a question that I have. I'm not quite sure about that. One of the things that, having worked at the Albany Y for many years, and if I ever have a time to be in the lobby and watching people make an illegal U-turn currently, really right in front of the building in order to exit out on Solano and not have to go down to Marin Avenue, because Marin is, very hard to make a left-hand turn, or even to go to the right, you have to go around the block if you're trying to find a parking space. So people are actively already making illegal U-turns on the street, and with a legal U-turn, I'm just questioning whether or not that's the best way to have a bike path corridor right there where people are actually trying to find parking, trying to get back out onto Solano as opposed to coming down to Marin. And just my last comment about that is if currently people going down to Marin to exit southbound on Kains, they tend to split and go north or east or west. And that would be just permitting 1 car or bike to be there at a time and possibly backing up traffic. Thank you. Thanks so much.
After Preston will be Ann Doot, and Ian McLeod, and Melissa Hubbs.
Good evening, Commission. Preston Jordan, one of the people who will be speaking from Albany Strolls and Rollers, and I'm also, turns out I'm a Y member and one of the people that bikes to the Y. I guess there's a lot of people who bike the wrong way already on Kains to get to the Y. I'm actually looking forward to this in terms of the safety project. I almost got in a head-on collision with a motorist going the wrong way from Marin onto Kains, coming to a meeting here years ago. They turned right off of Marin onto Kains. That was pretty dramatic. As far as the parking, I'll be interested to hear from Commissioner Jovendell, because this happens all over Berkeley, that people park on the left side of the street on blocks that have these semi-diverters. I've ridden one of those streets for 20 years on my work commute. I've never had a problem. That's anecdotal, but it is 20 years of anecdotes. So, and I've never seen enforcement there, so I don't know how Berkeley does it. Obviously, there's a way to do it. The previous agenda item gave a great example of Albany has directed its police department not to enforce certain state laws, such as the parking on sidewalks on Washington Avenue, which the city's known about for 7 years now, since it was brought up by Francis Chapman in 2011. Didn't seem to have a problem with not enforcing that. It also just changed policy to direct the police department to enforce parking across sidewalks. So there'd been direction of the police department not to enforce parking across sidewalks for decades and decades. So it seems like that could be handled with enforcement. I'd like to focus on another issue, which is the intersection of Kains and Brighton. So it's the intersection of this project and the North Albany traffic calming project. That project, you may recall, had a four-way stop at that intersection up until its very last consideration. So it had a four-way stop for quite a long time in the design up until the very last consideration. It moved to a four-way stop from Stanage to Kains. It put a neighborhood traffic circle at Stanage. Stanage is a dead end to the north, so it doesn't have much cross traffic, whereas Kains has considerable cross traffic due to entering into El Cerrito Plaza. The reason given for eliminating that four-way stop shift by the consultant after the close of public comment was that Caltrans either does not approve or does not appreciate having a stop sign one block off of a state highway like San Pablo, because it can cause motorists queuing to back up into the highway. That makes sense for a signalized cross street that is actually a through street, because then you get platoons of vehicles that come through on the green light. However, Brighton is a T intersection with San Pablo, and I drive that all the time. I live in that area. You do not get platoons of motorists there because they're turning either right or left off of San Pablo onto Brighton. And so queuing back up there in that context is not something that would be likely to occur all the way back into the highway. The advantage of putting a four-way stop there, obviously, is it makes it more of a bike boulevard and provides a pilot potentially for other intersections. Thank you.
My name is Ann Duncan. I live at 965 Kains. And some of the issues have been brought up tonight, but I will reiterate them. In the City Council meeting minutes, December 4, it stated that the police and fire departments prefer one-way and wider streets in order to move quickly. And as someone who has used the EMT, I am concerned about them being able to get to me. Barriers to entry on Kains from Marin would prevent EMTs, fire suppression, police emergencies from entering Marin. In those same minutes, the City Council suggested a proposal to this commission to implement a pilot project of internal two-way traffic on Adams Street only. So why is the proposal to include both Kains and Adams when it is a pilot project? I also am concerned about my safety because I walk slowly, and it's very difficult for me to maneuver if I've got traffic coming both ways and I have to cross the street. Mr. Larson states that the commission needs a clear description of the city's safety agency's final response on the proposed design. And I think you should hear directly from police and fire rather than going through a filter of the staff. Bicycles are already traveling north and south on Kains in the 900 block. So why clog the street with city staff painting bicycle strips that are not needed? And this pilot, particularly the three-point turning to go north, is going to cause traffic accidents, both for pedestrians and for people pulling out of driveways. So I'm sure you have thought about this issue, that you and the city council members could be personally liable if there are accidents and injuries. I think that this proposal of two-way traffic, but most particularly the three-point turning, is very dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, here's a letter. Somebody want to take it?
Hi, good evening. My name's Ian McLeod. I'm an Albany resident. I live on the 700 block of Spokane Avenue. I'd just like to say I'm very supportive of this in concept. I really like the idea of creating safe bicycle corridors on both sides of San Pablo. I think it's really important for our cycling infrastructure, for safe access on both sides of the street, both sides of San Pablo to get up and down, for kids to go to Ocean View, all those sorts of things. I think it does definitely need to feel safe for cyclists. And in that respect, I think you would need to have some kind of speed bumps or something to reduce the speed of the autos, because if it doesn't feel safe for cyclists, they're not going to use it. So I think that's a really important thing to take into account. I was looking at some of the pictures for the barriers, and I like the one from Tucson that seemed to be more of an active bike lane and not just a sign that says except for cyclists. I don't think that's really going to encourage cyclists to use it or be a very welcoming kind of infrastructure for bicyclists coming onto it from the opposite side, from the barrier side. So I think signage or some sort of street markings that would make it look like a much more active bikeway than just a sign that says except for bikes, which I don't think would be adequate. So again, very supportive of the concept, but I think it has to be made safe, and there have been a lot of concerns about three-point parking. A lot of others address that, but that does seem like something that would discourage cyclists if that's happening a lot as you're cycling. So I think some way that has to be addressed as well. But I think it is very important to have it on both sides. San Pablo, I think for equity issues for people who live on both sides, I think access to San Pablo and access north and south is very important for all our residents, not just one side. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
After Melissa will be Francesco Papalia.
Good evening. I'm Melissa Hobbs. I live in 900 block of Kains Avenue. I'm a bicyclist. I'm hesitant about this project, but I'm kind of considering that it's probably going to go ahead. My concerns are often the concerns of the other people here. Number one, this three-point parking. If it's not going to be enforced, then it doesn't concern me. But because we have 90 living units in the 900 block of Kains, and we have a lot of people coming and going with a Y, there's a lot of traffic. For myself, I can see myself making a three-point turn to try to park in front of my home, and then someone from the Y coming in and taking that space. Very common kind of thing. I mean, even now, people will wait to leave until their friend is waiting to pull into that parking space. Another question and concern is, with these barriers, what is the access of the garbage trucks? The garbage trucks come down the 900 block of Kains 5 days a week. I don't know how wide they are, but I know that when they are coming down, it's very hard for cars to get around them. So oncoming cars, if we have the two-way traffic, will have difficulty going through. And then how will it be for those garbage trucks? Are they going to be making left turns out onto Marin? Because they go through every day, they're making their circuits. Can they make egress? Additionally, fire trucks coming into Kains, because it's a very long block, the fire trucks have come up the wrong way. I don't know that they can fit in the width where these barriers have been put in. You know, they're making a right turn or a left turn into the 900 block of Kains. These are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Francesco Papalia. I live in the 800 block of Key Route, and I regularly drive and bicycle around Albany. And if you look at this map that I've created, the green lines are the bike ways. North, Washington and Marin are the main ones going east-west. And there's a bikeway on Pierce Street. There's one on Carlson going north-south. There's one from Berkeley on Jackson. And then you see all these green lines.
Just, yeah, if you could hold it up, Susan, I think it's
okay.
You're seeing it.
All the green lines then end up in the red box.
Why don't you also show the attendees?
Okay. The red box is where you put your life at risk trying to navigate through the worst part of Albany. You're directed onto San Pablo Avenue and fighting the traffic and the cars and the parked cars. I want everyone to take an idea that this is when we create roads, we create roads so people can travel distances and have throughways from one place to another. We now have a bike network that leads to the red zone, danger zone. And this is an effort to fix that by creating a north-south connector for Washington, Marin, Jackson, Carlson, and coming north from Berkeley on the east side of San Pablo Avenue. I also want you to remember that Pierce Street presently has over 1,000 condominium units in which many of the people have bicycles, and their access to our city by bicycle stinks, okay? They've always been this forgotten group. Who cares about them? They're not really part of Albany. Well, they are. And the bridge that could happen on the north side there to connect, make it easier, would show the kind of respect that the people on Pierce Street deserve. They're not here tonight because they don't even have a clue that they have the right to bicycle into Albany safely, because they're never really given it, because there's a hill that they have to go over. And they can only access Albany by going all the way down Pierce Street, getting onto Marin, going up the wonderful bike lanes there. And if they want to go to Solano Avenue, they've got to go all through the traffic zone. So please fix the gap and do it the best way possible and accommodating people's concerns here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to apologize if I don't get this name right. Jerzy Zaiba, and then Amy Smollins and Elaine Stelton.
Good evening. My name is Gergi Zuba, and I am a resident of Albany. I live in the Garfield neighborhood, 500 block of Talbot. So I live pretty close to the Adams and Kains avenues. Regarding the safety concerns, well, first of all, I wanted to say that I am an avid supporter of this project. I bike daily around the block there, and one of the major things that I want to do is access the businesses on San Pablo. Basically, just go along San Pablo and run errands. It's something that I cannot do without actually biking on San Pablo. I mean, the ideal thing here would be that there would be some cycle track on San Pablo. I have direct access to the businesses. That's something that maybe it's not right now, but sometime in the future might be some project that will accommodate that. But right now, what can we do right now? And I think this project will allow me as a biker to do that, to run the errands along San Pablo safely. Just bike along the roads, the streets that are just parallel, just next block to it, a short block next to San Pablo. So regarding the safety concerns that people addressed here, I wanted to say that the number one thing that comes with this is that converting the street, a narrow street, from a one lane, like a one way to two ways. Naturally, that actually slows down traffic. Drivers are more careful. They actually will slow down because they don't want to just hit another vehicle or maybe other bicyclists coming the other direction. So that's one thing. The other thing is that if you noticed in the designs, there are these stripes along the parking area on both sides. Well, that actually signifies, it gives the sign to the driver that, hey, actually the road is even narrower than you think. And I think that actually will enhance even more the sense of, like, hey, I need to be cautious here as a driver. So effectively, I think that actually will slow down traffic, which will end up in having even more safety. Regarding the parking thing, I think we should look into the Berkeley solution. I really like the idea of not enforcing traffic parking on the left side in the wrong direction. I think it's a very very valid concern that that drivers will have to make U-turns to park there. That actually the number of U-turns that might happen there actually might be causing also problems with bike traffic coming the other direction. So I think we should look into how Berkeley enforces this. So these are the points I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, that one, thanks. There you go. Handouts, like those teachers.
That's right. Did you bring enough for everybody?
One more.
Hello. I'm Amy Smolens. I've lived on the 900 block of Kains for 26 years. Really appreciative that after talking about this project for almost a decade, that we're going to finally get our Kains and Adams bike boulevards. Just one clarification as far as the distance between bike boulevards and main avenues in Berkeley. Russell is one block from Ashby. What's that?
North-south.
Okay, but still, the bike boulevard, the concept, Russell's a block from Ashby, Milvia is a block from Shattuck. So the concept of the bicycle boulevards being one block off the main thoroughfare where people don't really want to ride is valid. Okay, anyway.
Let's keep the crosstalk.
Okay,
2 minutes.
sorry. So I rode the streets last night, and it looked like this. And you can't see anything because it's black. This is Kains and this is Adams and Washington, and that's Kains and Portland. So I'm concerned when I look at the photo of the barriers, or one barrier, or whatever it turns out to be, that it's a gray barrier in the dark, and one little reflective dot on each one isn't going to do it. So I ask that whatever barriers you select, that you put some sort of reflective material, whether it's paint or reflective around it, but it's pitch dark on a lot of those blocks, so let's keep it safe. It's going to be hard for cyclists with lights to see. I agree with Mary and Brian and Ann and most other people that the prohibition of opposite way parking on these internally one-way streets is really misguided. You're basically going to require 50%, half of the drivers that enter on Kains, for example, to make a U-turn in order to park. And then half of those people may then decide to make another U-turn to leave. So I just really feel like it's going to be chaotic, and you're going to be forcing, you're trying to make these bicycle boulevards to keep cyclists safe, and you're going to be creating all this U-turn and three-point turns on an already narrow street. And I just think that that's very misguided, and that you should take a cue from Berkeley and allow the opposite side, wrong side parking. That's really, they do it, we can do it. We do it with Washington, as other people have pointed out. Just allow it. It's everywhere. So please do that, and thank you for helping make our streets safer for everybody. And sorry for knocking your signs down. Thanks.
The signs are okay. Thank you, Amy.
Elaine. Elaine is our last speaker card.
Hi, I own a building on the 900 block of Kains, and currently my tenants have visibility exiting with the one-way flow of traffic, but we will have a blind driveway if cars and bikes, and hopefully not driving on the sidewalk. I hope the bicycles will not be on the sidewalk, but if they are, my tenants will have a lot of difficulty exiting without hitting a car or, God forbid, a bike. Also, I wanted to just point out that I've sat in front of the Y on many occasions, sometimes for hours, and they do have a very large senior population that may have slower reflexes in terms of not expecting a bike coming at them from a direction that they weren't used to the bike coming from before, or a car coming at them from a direction that they're not used to. And I think we do have to reach out to the lovely representative from the Y and have her alert her seniors that traffic patterns may be changing, and to please be cautious. And the last thing is, I think the commission really does need to reach out directly to the police and fire department. I have, and I think you all need to as well, because they definitely do have concerns. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I have no other speaker cards. There was one person who had to leave, Jane Williamson, and she did leave a note on the card about parking issues not addressed and not addressing lack of lighting.
Not addressing?
The lack of lighting.
Lighting. Okay. Thank you for all that input. In fact, Fareed's still writing what he heard. Does anybody want to get started?
Yeah, sure. Overall on the project, I do support going forward with the pilot. I think that's what the council supported, and that's what we had talked about at the last meeting. And just for justification for the pilot, the one that resonates to me the most, I was thinking along the same lines as the resident on Garfield, that you're basically converting a one-way couple of roadways, which in any city are notorious for being extra fast, because you just have more width to work with. You don't have to deal with cars traveling in the opposite direction. And so you're going to, I think the project will create the benefit of traffic calming for Kains and Adams. by converting those to two-way. We need the bike boulevard. San Pablo, I really appreciate when cities implement bike boulevards off of the main corridors. I think it's a much more relaxed environment for the cyclist than traveling on San Pablo. Traveling on San Pablo with a bike, one, you're gonna have to put in something quite drastic to make that work, or you're gonna have really stressed out vehicles as well as cyclists. So going forward with the bike boulevard option and a pilot, as what we had agreed to, and also what the council has agreed to, makes a lot of sense to me. I think we do have to figure out what to do with the idea that cars will do a 3-point turn in order to get into the opposite lane, opposite direction of travel to get to a parking space. I don't think that's going to happen. So it'd be great to get some feedback from Fareed and what happens in Berkeley in terms of enforcement. I guess it is unusual in that cars will be crossing over to the opposite lane of travel to get into a parking spot. So that's different. So I would want to make sure that we refine that today, and kind of want to hear what the other commissioners have to say before we make a decision on that piece. That's everything I have.
So I too am very interested in the design. I love the crosswalk markings, which was mentioned by the neighborhood. The lack of lighting concerns me. I don't know that that's in the plans, and the crosswalk, both the crosswalk and the bollards, you know, what that design is, and the lighting, I think is critical to make this successful at all times of the day. I'm a little unclear on the police and fire. I mean, they've been contacted, but I'm a little unclear on that, and I'm assuming, which is not always good, that there's enough space for both the fire trucks, the police, and garbage trucks, because that was brought up too. I don't think the garbage trucks are bigger than the fire trucks in our city, so.
Perhaps now is a good time to engage with staff and talk about the engagement with the fire and police departments.
Yep.
I'll start and you can jump in. We have talked with both of the departments about this. With respect to the fire department, as Justin mentioned earlier, they generally prefer one-way streets. It allows them to move more quickly, and it also allows people to get out more quickly. Unfortunately, we live in an era where communities have to sometimes evacuate, and so one-way streets are their preference. They acknowledge that there are other safety benefits, but in terms of their operational benefits, they prefer one-way, and as much room as possible to maneuver their trucks because they are large and they don't have good turning radiuses. And so that room is what also sometimes creates safety issues for bicyclists and regular-sized automobiles. With respect to the placement of the bollards, it would continue to be our practice if this moves forward to test out any of the tight turns with the fire apparatus. We would go out there with cones and make sure that they can make the maneuvers and make adjustments if necessary.
When you say make the maneuvers, does that include that they should be able to turn from one of the east-west streets onto Kains and Adams and go around the barriers, essentially, to make the movement that ordinary cars are prohibited from making?
Right. If there's a call in the middle of the block, you want them to be able to go around the barrier. Yes.
Right. So you would we would only go forward with this if we can place the barriers in such a way that a fire truck can make the right turn or the left turn, which is marked as prohibited.
Correct.
Okay.
Which is what they do now in some cases if they have to get in the middle of the
Right,
block.
but now they don't have the barriers to contend with.
And this whole area, both of these streets I think we're involved in are striping for safe crosswalks, correct? I mean, that's already in place. Or is there more of that?
I don't remember the striping, active transportation striping. Robert might remember better than I exactly what's in the project.
Are you asking about the
crosswalk approach, yeah, all of the striping that we're doing to make sure that the approach has, how many feet? I don't remember.
Oh, you're talking about the red zones?
Yeah.
Approach and
Yeah.
yeah.
That would allow the space probably for the fire trucks to go around. I think these areas had it, but I'm not.
I think the areas, the parallel streets to Solano in lower or downtown Albany were being worked on progressively. So there's some of that, but I don't think it's consistent.
Okay.
We'll double check that to make sure that there's visibility for the pedestrian, for the motorist to see the pedestrian.
Okay.
Just in terms of police and fire, it's my assumption that since they didn't have a final plan to look at, they didn't give a final, sort of judgment on the plan that they didn't have.
Right. We didn't ask them for a written statement.
Right.
If we need that, we can do that. Absolutely. It's a little bit more of a conversation with us with respect to the police department issues. Our understanding is the vehicle code is the vehicle code in California, and our police department doesn't like to make, or the current administration of the police department doesn't like to make a statement that they're not going to enforce the vehicle code. There may be things that are much higher priorities, and there may very, very rarely be tickets written, but they don't want to say they can't enforce that. That's different than practices that have evolved from decades ago, where they've continued. In Washington Avenue is an example where the vehicle code says you're not supposed to park on a sidewalk. The practice was established decades ago, and the current administration has kind of continued that practice, but they don't necessarily want to introduce new situations of that if that can be avoided. The other issue with respect to parking on the left-hand side of the street is a safety one. With respect to the motorist pulling out, doesn't have as good of a view of the oncoming vehicles and particularly oncoming bicyclists. So there is a safety. It's not just a enforcement issue, but there's also a safety question that the commission should take into consideration with that as well.
Which is not to imply that you're suggesting that the entire street should be back in angle parking on one side for view lines. You're not suggesting that?
No.
Right. Did you have anything else, Susan?
No, that gets it for now.
Okay. Let's see, you've been going first. Harry, are you ready to go?
Sure. I wanted to follow up on the garbage truck question. So do we assume that the garbage trucks will continue to serve these streets by traveling only in the preferred direction? That means they'll be, basically as they do now, they'll be collecting from both the right and left side as they make their way down the street?
I don't know. We could look into that. I don't know if they would modify their practices if the.
I'm sure they wouldn't make a 3-point turn.
But that's what they do on other two-way streets in Albany that are not of a wide right-of-way. Maybe Santa Fe, you probably do both sides, but the other ones that are similar roadway width, they collect both sides in one direction.
On Curtis, they do. I think they go both.
Do both directions.
Make a pass in each direction, but maybe Curtis isn't as narrow as some of the others.
Yeah.
I thought they passed, because they're using the lift arms, they pass by.
If they don't have a left side lift arm,
They don't.
how could they collect the trash now? They'd have to move the can across the street and then pick it up.
I don't think they
must be
go
what
back
they
and
do.
do both sides. Yeah.
So they could continue to do that, but it's just a little more fraught because.
A little bit. Yeah.
Better for them to be able to drive the other way.
but they can't get their truck facing the way.
Right. So that might be a question of, do we provide an exemption for them to be able to enter from the wrong way as emergency vehicles would? Or we let them just keep operating the way they are?
What are they doing today?
They don't mind, that's fine.
I think it's just the barriers on the end to make sure there's clearance for them to get through.
So leave it alone, it's working?
Well, I think we have to ask the operator if they are comfortable continuing to collect on both sides as they travel in one direction, given that there's now two-way traffic, or if they would rather change their route so that they go in both directions, and if so, they would need an exception so that they can make the forbidden turn.
We'll check with them to see whether they have any input on this.
Okay. Let's see. There were some questions about evaluation criteria and how we would test this. I'm sure we need to talk about that. I'm not sure if we need to talk about it tonight. Is this the best time to settle on the way we are going to evaluate the pilot, or are we comfortable postponing that discussion till another day? I don't know.
Why would you like to postpone it?
No reason. I'm just asking.
Maybe the question is, do we want to have staff propose evaluation criteria and a process to evaluate, or do we want to come up with that tonight?
Well, I would say that from the staff report, they've proposed a process. I'm not sure there's an evaluation plan with that. It's probably adaptable.
There's two questions, I think. One is, if you're going to collect data on certain blocks, which blocks will those be? And we heard one opinion about that from the public. And the second question is, once we've collected the data and come up with some observations, how do we say whether this outcome means the pilot worked, the pilot didn't work, the pilot should be adjusted, the whole thing should be terminated? I don't want to sit here tonight and come up with a complete flow chart saying, if we get this result, then we do this. But to what extent do we tonight want to discuss possible outcomes and what we would consider a successful outcome and what we would consider cause for concern at the end of the pilot? And it may be fine to just say we'll collect the data that staff has talked about, and once we see it, we will make a subjective decision about what got better and what got worse, and then figure out then how to weigh it against. I don't really see us tonight coming up with a formula for how to evaluate that data to conclude success or failure. Do we want to get any farther in the discussion of how to evaluate success or failure tonight, or are we comfortable postponing all of that until we see this in action and have some data to look at?
I'm fairly satisfied that the sampling that has been proposed is enough to either support things that we come up between now and then, or to look at, as you say, in a sort of subjective way.
Okay. Let's see. I definitely want to hear from Fareed about how Berkeley manages the wrong way parking issue. I'm sure we'll hear about that in a minute. There was a question about the cost to remove this treatment if we conclude that the pilot is a failure, and whether that cost should be estimated now and whether the budget should be adjusted to include that.
I think once we settle on the design, we can include in our pilot program cost to deliver that, cost to remove it, cost for alterations. Those can all be presented as part of a potential budget that would go with the project.
take out.
Okay. Let's see, what else do I have? Well, there was, let's see, there's definitely some discussion about what kind of barrier to put up. My personal preference would be to have it be as small and unobtrusive as possible while still preventing cars from making the movement we want to block. What was shown in the photo, in the mock-up photos, I don't know how much that was to scale or how literally we should take those photos. It seemed a little intense to me. Like it felt like it was putting a lot of material there and not leaving a lot of room for the bicycles, frankly, to get through, and especially for turning bicycles coming from the cross streets, wanting to make a right turn. Like if you're traveling west on a cross street and you want to make a right turn onto Kains or vice versa, then the barrier, one of the barriers is right in the path where you'd want to make that turn. And I guess your choices are to go to the right of it, in which case you may be in a gutter pan, or to go to the left of it, in which case, if you look at those two pictures there, you can see the one in the picture on the left there, it would be easy for bicycles to travel through that space, and the picture on the right maybe not so easy, especially if you're turning. So again, I don't know that there's necessarily a right and wrong answer here, but in terms of aesthetics and usability, my preference would be to make the diameter of the barriers as small as practical, and also to make them as short as practical, just so they don't take up too much visual space, don't block sight lines more than necessary. But of course, there's room for discussion on that. So in some of the emailed comment that we didn't have time to hear tonight, there were questions about the details of the writing on the signs, whether they need to enumerate exceptions a little bit more clearly, or whether they're clear enough as they are. One thing that could be added is, instead of just saying except bicycles, it could say except bicycles and emergency vehicles and garbage trucks. I don't know if that's really necessary, because surely the emergency vehicle drivers know that they're allowed, even if the sign doesn't say so. Another question was about the no-turn signs, which currently are kind of minimalist, whether they should also say except bicycles. That, I could see a little more justification for that if people are going to be riding and they see a sign that says no turn and they wonder whether that applies to them or not. I think most people would conclude that on a bicycle it's okay to make the turn, but if there was a way to add a small except bicycles on the no turn signs, that might be helpful. And back to the barriers, I also wanted to reiterate what was said about reflectors. I think whatever size barrier we come up with, we need to make sure that the full dimension of it is coated with reflective surface, so that anybody riding a bike at night can see exactly how wide it is. So not just a single point of reflection, but kind of give the parameters. It should give its parameters so that people know what they're up against. Mm-hmm. I think that's it for me.
I just want to riff on that for a sec. I like the barriers shown on sheet 2. They're rounded, they're somewhat low, and I could see an inset band around an entire circular container or bollard or whatever it is that had reflection or reflectors in it that were protected from collision. Now, I don't know if that's available, but
there's something like that, yeah.
Yeah, that would be, in my mind, ideal.
And can we ask the designer what your thought process was through, or the design process through the spacing between the barriers, height, size, et cetera?
Yeah, we wanted to keep the height of the barrier lower than the handlebars because we didn't want anybody to hit it. And the 5 feet being pretty standard width for a bikeway. Most bikes take about 3 feet worth of width, including rather wide handlebars. I will also point out that at the intersection here, this cross section shown that the shared lane width is 17 feet, and in the mid-block section, it's 16 feet. So the width is the effective space that's available when there's no parking on either side. One other question that came up was placement of the barriers, whether they be in the, what you'd call the front of the crosswalk nearest the traffic versus the back of the crosswalk onto the side street. And we researched a bunch of different options, but found that at the front of the crosswalk, you actually provided a bit more space for emergency vehicles, larger vehicles to make the turn, whereas if they were set back a bit more. Let me pull up the sheet.
Yeah.
If they were set back a bit more, then they would be closer to the parked cars.
Right.
Oh, I see.
And so that extra space is available for emergency vehicles and other large vehicles to make their turn. Also, where the barriers are placed right now, they are still, although close to the intersecting street, within the shadow of the parked vehicle space on Garfield and other intersecting streets, so they're not in the direct path of travel for the traffic, but rather they are set back from the path of travel within the reasonable edge that the parked vehicles would be occupying. Also, for the variability in the placement of the bollards, as noted in the plans, we actually verified where the curb ramps were and placed the crosswalks in the appropriate locations so that they would encapsulate the flares of the crosswalk. And that's how we decided on where to place the barriers, so that they would not be in the path of the travel for pedestrians in the crosswalk. So that's why some of them are a little set forward and some of them are a little set back. It's based on where the crosswalks are. One other one, if you'll indulge me, is there's one location at Kains and Marin, I think, where we show a bulb out and a single barrier. That bulb out was actually constructed recently as part of the Marin project. And so we only needed one barrier to make that effective width for the vehicle travel.
Sorry, I did have one more comment on my list. Not, I'm not sure if I need you at the mic for this, but we are talking about constructing kind of a second-rate bicycle boulevard here compared to what we see in other cities, because at almost every intersection you have to stop and the cross traffic has right-of-way, and that doesn't really make for convenient travel. And I would think that we would have the strength of political will to say, let's change those stop signs. And let's make a proper bicycle boulevard. And what it would take is what Preston suggested, move the four-way stop so that instead of being on Stanage, it would be at Kains. And we could try that at Brighton and try that at other streets. And I'm curious to hear is there a technical reason why we can't do that, or is it just a matter of political will? And we had heard the thought that it's inappropriate to have a stop sign so close to the major street, so close to San Pablo Avenue, but after hearing Preston's thoughts about it, I'm confused about why that presents a technical problem.
I'd have to research the history on that. It was before my time here.
Okay. And I mean, there may be places where, like at Solano and Marin, certainly I wouldn't expect to have stop signs on the major street 1 block away from San Pablo, but But especially where there's alternating streets that don't go through, it seems like it should be feasible.
Right, so who hasn't, Fareed. So you have been asked to enumerate or elucidate what goes on in Berkeley.
Sure. Well, I can say that as far as complaints about safety issues and operational issues with the contraflow or left side parking on these types of streets in Berkeley, I've heard none. So we can speculate and maybe we'll have a different experience, but honestly, I hear complaints about all kinds of stuff. So the fact that I haven't heard any about this kind of leads me to think it's working.
But can you explain exactly what Berkeley does? Like, is there any policy about this in Berkeley, or?
Well, there's a lot of things in Berkeley about parking that are not routinely enforced, and this is one of them. I'm not aware of an explicit policy or council action in Berkeley that says, hey, we're not going to do this. We know that parking enforcement in Berkeley doesn't enforce the left side parking. We know that unless the resident complains, they will not enforce against people parking across their driveway. So there's a lot of stuff there that's just kind of, this is the common knowledge that, hey, you can do this in Berkeley and no one's going to care. That said, I think we should take a more affirmative approach than that, because if we are not clear, people won't know what to do. Worst case scenario, well, maybe not worst case scenario, but we don't want people arguing over, hey, you're not supposed to do that, and saying, oh no, it's okay. And I don't want someone to say, I'm always going to make a U-turn because I'm afraid that if I don't park facing the right way, I'll get cited if we have no intention of citing. I appreciate that the police department may not want to have a policy that says we won't enforce this law, but I think that we need to, among other things, have an outreach plan that lets everyone know, hey, here's a change that's coming, here's what you can expect. It's okay to park on the left side of the street, and as a council policy, we're asking the police department not to enforce it on these specific blocks. Not that we're going to abandon that policy citywide, because there's a lot of good reasons to have it on other streets. But here, for a specific reason, it's not going to be enforced. It's okay to park on the left side or park contraflow. I'm not going to call it wrong side parking because our policy will say it's not the wrong side. Encourage people to signal before they park, which theoretically we should do anyway, but especially if you're going to park on the left side, signal so the oncoming cars or bikes or anyone will know to expect what's going to happen. Also, the outreach plan should reinforce, kind of what we all know from this discussion, but the average person may not know, that we're going to allow one-way entry to the street, but two-way exiting traffic. Hopefully our signs make that clear, but again, why leave it up to guesswork? Let's make it really clear, this is what we plan, this is what we intend, here's the behaviors we expect, and here's what you can expect in terms of enforcement. Because I do think that requiring unnecessary three-point turns creates more conflict. Even the concern that someone's going to steal your parking space while you're trying to turn around to park is a perfectly legitimate concern. I think we can make it function better with that kind of clarity. So I would ask council to include a policy of not enforcing against left side parking on these streets. I think that's important. And really at that point, we would be in exactly the same kind of operating paradigm as Berkeley, maybe a little more clarity, which I think is a good thing. But in terms of the function of those roads in Berkeley, there really hasn't been any problem brought to my attention. So I think that's definitely something I feel comfortable with based on that experience.
Can I stop you there?
Please.
Justin, could you give us a little more information about the Long Beach situation, if you have it?
I have not contacted them, but I can tell you what's in the state law. So this, for the rules, I'll try to skip but for the rules dictating where you can park on the left-hand side for one way, not otherwise, it essentially says the City of Long Beach may, by ordinance or resolution, implement a pilot program to authorize vehicles to park on the left-hand side of the roadway parallel to and within 18 inches of the left-hand curb on two-way local resident streets that dead end with no cul-de-sac or other designated area in which to turn around. If the City of Long Beach has first made a finding supported by a professional engineering study that the ordinance or resolution is justified by the need to facilitate the safe and orderly movement of vehicles on the roadways affected by the resolution or ordinance. It then goes on to specify specific locations within the City of Long Beach for this, and includes a sunset provision, basically 2 years from the date of enactment, that it establishes a pilot program or report that outlines the advantages and disadvantages, and then this specific provision terminates after 3 years from the date of enactment.
Okay.
So I think the key phrase in that is that it applies only to dead-end streets. Is that correct? On two-way local residential streets that dead end with no cul-de-sac. So I'm not sure what these drivers are planning to do when they leave their parking space if there's no cul-de-sac and there's no way for them to turn around. It's a dead-end street.
I'm not sure about the more specifics.
Maybe they
of
just stay
merit in
there.
this.
Okay. Thank you.
So on that note, I think if we ask council to adopt a policy of not enforcing against left side parking, we should also ask that we reach out to our state legislators and ask for an explicit authorization for us to establish that as a policy. I mean, if it's been done in other communities, we can do the same thing. So I think that should be part of it. As far as, certainly I think we should confirm that the police department and fire department, while it may not be their first choice, will accept this, and it feels like that's what they're doing. In my experience in multiple cities, if the fire department feels something's a real problem, they will always say no. The fact that they have not said no is pretty clear to me. They're willing to accept it. So if they haven't said no now and they plan to say no later, I'd be shocked. As far as the kind of the need, there was a little bit of discussion around that. I know we're well past that point, but I got to say I see a lot of southbound bikes on San Pablo coming from El Cerrito, and I've got to think if we do this, some of them are going to shift over because it's a whole lot more comfortable being off of San Pablo. As far as the evaluation, I think I support what staff is thinking of. If we can do speed and volume before and afters, that's always great. Just so we know have the speeds changed. Hopefully they get better. But I do feel like ultimately our evaluation is going to be mostly qualitative. So I don't see laying out a clear-cut meet this threshold or else type of approach. We need to be, looking at it carefully. As far as the barriers, I think what we heard as far as the height being below handlebar height makes perfect sense. The width of the openings at 5 feet, matching standard bike lane widths, all of that's very rational. The sort of cylindrical shape being similar to what you see in Berkeley will lead familiarity, which I think is actually a good thing. We don't need them looking identical. We just need them kind of, oh yeah, this is kind of like that. Let's see, the signs themselves that we put, the do not enter signs, those are reflective. So that's actually a good thing. I like the reflective band around the barrier. You see stuff like that on utility poles, so the material exists. We just need to use it.
Utility poles aren't usually in the roadway, though.
Oh, yeah, and yet you see reflective bands on them. I mean, the material that's
absolutely.
used.
Absolutely. I'm just saying that the insetting it helps in a different situation. Yeah.
And also when you hit a utility pole, a lot of problems occur
There are other
beyond
problems,
just damage to your vehicle. As far as signs allowing the fire department to enter, fire department can drive the wrong way on any street they want anytime already. They don't need specific signs, so we don't need to waste sign space on that. The placement, as we see on this figure of the barriers at the crosswalk line, actually makes a lot of sense for the reasons that were given. It also means that someone coming down Garfield could turn right onto Kains between the curb and the first barrier because it's farther out. If you move them in, it would tighten up that space. So right now the curb return, the curb radius, sort of widens up the space as you get out into the intersection. So we take advantage of that to give them more flexibility as a cyclist making that turn, as well as the cyclist coming straight up Kains. So I think that that looks fine. Adding the accept bikes message on the turn prohibition signs, I think is a good thing to do. I don't want people to feel like, well, I'm going to do it because I can get away with it. I want them to feel like I'm doing this because it's explicitly allowed. There's a question about the four-way stop locations and kind of where those came from within the traffic management plan. That was to establish a pattern of stop signs on the east-west streets. We could shift the pattern, but I think honestly, that's a separate issue. We don't have to address it now. It can certainly be addressed at some point, but rather than muddy the waters, I think let's move with what we have. If we were to shift them, that might well help the bike boulevard flow, but I'm okay with taking it one step at a time to get there. We've been dealing with this for a long time without that being part of the conversation. So it feels like it'd be unfair to the neighborhood to throw that in at the last second. Really, that's pretty much it.
Great. Thank you, especially for that information from Berkeley and your opinion as a traffic engineer. Did you get a chance? You did? Wow, okay. In speaking about the no turn sign, it's a visual sign. I wonder if there's a visual way to reinforce that bicyclists can go. Maybe there's a green bike on the otherwise red and black sign, you know, or a bike with a check mark. I don't know. I'll just throw that out there. I would love to see, as part of this pilot, signage, publicity, and outreach. If the people are on San Pablo and they're biking on the sidewalk, you see them, they're flying along, they're having a great time. They have no idea what's going on Kains and Adams. So it'd be great to have some signage that could help direct them to the pilot.
We've talked about doing that using the kind of the template that we've developed for the sidewalk project.
The like wayfinding signs?
No, there's for the sidewalk project, there are little green signs that we've used, like.
That there aren't so many available tree wells on San Pablo. Anyway, but that would be great, and but also other publicity. I mean, you know, can we reach out through Bikey Spay? Can we, you know, can we go through the El Cerrito newsletter to sort of let people in that town know what's going on when they might be coming through, that kind of thing. I'm worried about lighting. I haven't had a chance to check it out and go see. It doesn't sound like that's really a part of this plan at this point for the pilot. That seems like outside of the scope. Fortunately, a lot of the signs are those signs are reflective. That's something I think we should monitor, or you know, at least take a look at.
Isn't there other lighting work going on? No.
I don't think we have any specific. Do we?
The Public Works Department has on their work plan a street lighting master plan. It hasn't been something they've had time to initiate, but it is something that they want to work on as in the near future, a citywide look at street lighting.
So now the bollards are sort of rounded with an inset reflective strip, and then there's the solar LED lighting, and the, yeah, okay. I agree that 3-point turns on these streets are going to be problematic. I would love to see us come up with an exception policy for contraflow parking. I understand that certainly on either side of Solano, Kains especially, and to some extent Adams, are more urban streets with a lot of parking usage. So they may be different than some of the bike boulevards in Berkeley that we've looked at, that, you know, Milvia north of Cedar, or, you know, it's a lot more residential. But I think the other problem is that we don't have those decades of use. And if they're high density areas, we need to come up with a way to set that culture. And there again, publicity, outreach, signage. I am not in favor of addressing all the stop signs on side streets at this time, but I am interested in addressing the stop sign at Kains and Brighton, especially since the project is proposed for calming in North Albany includes stop signs at Stanage, which to me is not high throughput both directions.
Also, I think the decision about where to put the stop signs will influence decision about where to build traffic circles.
Presumably there are ripple effects.
Yeah, and if we're going to be building traffic circles, we should do it with our most forward-looking ideas about where we're going to put the stop signs. We don't want to have to move the traffic circle later if we decide to move the stop sign.
Were there any other follow-up thoughts?
I like your idea of outreach, because I think on this project, it's always been, if we build it, I do believe they'll come. It's not a matter, yeah, there might not be that traffic on there now, but if there was a place for it, I think we'll see it being used. People have to know it's there, though.
Okay. So I think the question then is, how much are we recommending to the council to move forward on from this point, and how much do we want to keep working on, or maybe we want to look at or ask staff to come up with a draft policy for contraflow parking. We need to direct the continuation of the project, or at least make a recommendation, or come up with what we want to do next.
So I think that I don't know that we have to fully flesh out what the pilot legislation would be, but we do need to ask, or have council ask staff to reach out to our state legislators to try to get that enacted into law, whether as a pilot or just permanent. I think it's something that will have to be negotiated to see what they're comfortable doing. But for our purposes and what we're going to ask council to do, it's to initiate that process. And I think we do that in conjunction with saying that, you know, contact state legislators to establish a pilot left side parking allowance for these streets, and establish a policy of not enforcing left side parking prohibition on these blocks.
Pending.
You know, pending this effort. So I think with that, we could basically move the recommendation in the report with inclusion of any feasible design modifications discussed tonight, such as reflectors, signage modifications. I don't think any of those were really substantive, and as we're going from 95% design to 100%, presumably that would all happen anyway. I don't think we have to itemize those in the motion.
Would council want a local policy to come back through to the commission?
Sure, I mean, we could certainly take that up. They could refer that back to us to develop policy language that they can then send to the state legislators and say, hey, we'd like state law that allows this. I mean, again, it's not necessary for us to move forward, but I think it would be a positive element of this to not leave us in a gray area. We could do it without it, but trying to move towards that while we're doing the pilot would be positive. It hopefully gives the police department a little more comfort with the, then temporary policy of not enforcing a particular parking regulation because we're in the process of trying to change it at the state level.
But it seems like you do want some sort of interim policy language that staff would generate for.
I think we do the two together.
Okay.
Say we're trying to change the law to formalize this, and in the meantime, we're not going to enforce current law as we see done in other cities. But we're trying to do it better.
Yeah. Okay. Would you like to propose a motion?
So I'll move that we recommend to council to approve the designs for the Kains and Adams Bikeway and traffic calming pilot project with inclusion of refinements as discussed tonight, and set the duration of the pilot for 1 year. Additionally, that we ask council to work with staff and the...
Slow down a little bit.
Ask council to direct staff and the Transportation Commission to draft potential legislation for consideration by our state legislators. To allow contraflow parking on these streets. And establish a temporary policy suspending enforcement against contraflow parking pending resolution at the state level. So that's the motion.
That's the motion. Okay. Part of your motion was, I'm sorry, can we discuss it before we get a second? Or do we have to get a second first?
Strictly speaking, I think there should be a second, then you can.
Is anybody ready to second the motion?
I'll second the motion.
Great.
Can we read it back before we discuss it? Or are you able to read it back at the moment?
Recommendation, the motion is that you provide a recommendation to council to approve designs for the Kains and Adams Bikeway and traffic calming project, set the duration of the project for 1 year with inclusion of refinements discussed tonight, and ask council to direct staff and the Transportation Commission to draft potential legislation for our state legislature to allow contraflow parking on these streets and establish a temporary policy suspending enforcement against contraflow parking pending resolution of legislation at the state level.
Yes. That was it?
Okay, discussion.
Do we want to entertain the stop signs at the intersection of Kains and Brighton?
Is that included in the things that were discussed tonight?
Yeah, is that, do we have
That may go beyond the refinement.
I mean, we could certainly make that explicit if that's, if there's general support for that.
I'd like to. Anyone else in favor of?
Yeah. Well, I would accept that as a friendly amendment to
Okay.
Pursue the inclusion of a four-way stop at Kains and Brighton.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Hearing none. The recommendation stands. Thank you.
I move to extend the meeting to 10:30.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Second from Robert.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks to everyone for their comments. Please feel free to stick around for the next item.
So with respect to item 5.3, we had a little bit of a cross-up with our consultant and public works staff, so we don't have anything on the pavement management program this evening, but we will have a substantive presentation on that for your January meeting. We expect
Okay. Folks, if I can ask you to step out into the hallway, please. We're going to continue the meeting. Thank you very much. Feel free to come back, however. So we're going to skip item number 5.3.
On 5.3, there's nothing urgent that commission needs to hear before any type of actions are taken or decisions are made on that?
Correct. It's going to come to you first.
Okay.
Before it advances to council.
Okay, great.
Do we have a public comment on 5.3? We'll take that.
So some on the commission may know that years ago I got informed about MTC's mandate for all jurisdictions in the Bay Area to have a pavement management plan, and learned about a program that it developed called Street Saver, which is used by all jurisdictions and their consultants to develop that pavement management plan. I've pursued gaining more knowledge about that software because I had questions about it for years. I finally was able to get a meeting with somebody at MTC who has line management authority over that software. The key information that came out of that was that the software is predicated on the assumption that the risk of poor pavement quality is the same to all modes of transportation, which is may not be accurate. They did not present any quantitative studies to support that assumption. My guess is that it probably is not accurate, that a pothole presents much more risk to somebody who's on a two-wheeled vehicle than in a four-wheeled vehicle, just for the reasons of basic physics. But obviously a quantitative study would be a better way to approach that. So it's sort of astounding to me that the software that guides which streets get repaved, which streets get maintained throughout the entire Bay Area, and this software is actually used beyond the Bay Area, is based on essentially a complete assumption. So in that regard, and it's been said, and I know, for instance, in Berkeley has a kind of a tiebreaker policy where if two streets have the same pavement quality index or the same level of recommendation coming out of Street Saver, my understanding was that the benefit would go to the street that has the cycling facility. However, it's a 100-point scale, so the probability of a tie is not real high. It's not much of a benefit. There's also in psychology and economics and negotiating theory a concept of anchoring. So there's been numerous psychological experiments done where the answer that is the first answer has a significant effect on what the final answer is. So if you start in different places, you end up in different places. you don't always end up in the most optimal result. That's why negotiators always try to get their answer out first so they can anchor people to that idea, and then everybody moves away from that, but not as far as they need to. So in this regard, I think Albany needs to not use street saver because I believe it has a faulty assumption. It needs to go its own way in developing that. Now, staff has said, and staff says in every city, well, we don't take the answer street saver gives just right out of the gate. But it is the first answer, and as the first answer, it is a powerful answer, and I think it's powerfully wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from commissioners?
Just want to say one of the things that we do in Berkeley is that we divide up the funding for street pavement management into local residential streets, collectors, and arterials. So there's 3 pots of money. More money is put into the streets that have the higher use. So local residential streets tend to get the smallest amount of money proportionally. The assumption being because there's fewer users. A lot of our bike boulevards are local residential streets, so to avoid them suffering from that, we elevate them and treat them as collectors because functionally they are. They serve a higher purpose for cyclists. So I think an adjustment of that type that categorically prioritizes bike boulevards is something that's a pretty easy adjustment to make. And it just is something we have to incorporate into our policy of how we take the data, whether it's coming from Street Saver or other sources, and use it. So just to share that information. I know we're not making any decision on it tonight, but I think that that is an example of a useful approach to try to prioritize according to the sensitivity and needs of different users. I think anytime we treat bike routes equitably with vehicles, we're going to reach different conclusions than if we kind of treated them as an afterthought.
So Berkeley does use Street Saver?
We do use Street Saver, and we adjust the answers that it gives us before it becomes part of a public discussion. That's part of the baseline treatment. So that, again, as far as the question of, what's the anchor, what's the first proposal already includes that. So it's not a thing that we have to adjust after the fact.
Okay. Other comments? Let's proceed. So we're going to item number 5.4, the Codornices Creek Restoration Project, Phase 4, 8th Street to 10th Street.
Yes, I'll start with a very quick overview. I think everybody's familiar with it, but just to give you a refresher, the planning and implementation of the restoration of Codornices Creek between Kains and Interstate 80, actually the entire stretch has been ongoing since the late 1990s. It's been implemented in phases in a partnership with us, the City of Berkeley, and the University of California. The original plan that we're still working under to some degree, it was prepared in 2001, and 3 phases of the project, actually more than 3 phases, 4 phases of the project have been completed. 3 of the phases run from 8th Street down to the Union Pacific Railroad tracks, and then the 4th phase is a piece from San Pablo to 10th Street. And what we're talking about this evening is to fill the gap between 8th Street and 10th Street, which will get people around the Little League fields and the UC Village parking lot. The project has been in our capital improvement plan for a couple of years. It was originally envisioned to be a little bit larger project to include the restoration, a formal ecological restoration of the creek between 8th and 10th. And based on some community input, we decided that it was a good idea to scale it back to just this segment and focus really on the trail element between 8th and 10th and try to stay out of the creek channel itself for a couple of different reasons. So what we have today is essentially a bicycle, shared use bicycle pedestrian path from 8th to 10th, a crossing at 8th Street, and then some relatively minor vegetation that goes along with that. What I will do is kind of walk you through.
Justin, when you get a chance, either take one or don't, and pass it to Jeff, and then pass it to the folks
I'm going to pass since I'm
out
going
there.
to be talking.
Please, it'll come back. These are from Robert. It's
Robert's wife.
From Robert's family.
So this first sheet is from on the west side of the project. To give you oriented, where's the, there we go. This area, this is 8th Street. This is the crossing at 8th Street. There's an existing trail, shared use trail that runs further west. And the proposal is to improve this, have a shared use path along 8th Street, and then create this pathway around the UC Village parking lot. This is a parking lot that's used by staff and maintenance vehicles. A couple things going on here. There are some trees around here, so the pathway is trying to navigate through the existing trees. We have received some comments, and we'll take them to heart of trying to soften these 90-degree corners so that the bicyclists can go have a little bit more direct route, a little bit easier turn for everybody. But the intent of that was to navigate the existing trees. There's some modifications to this parking lot to tighten it up, to create room for the path. So there's some changes to the parking island there, and this the turning radiuses are tightened up a little bit. They still need to be able to get trucks in and out. The oops. This is the middle segment, so picking up where we were there, there's the parking lot connects right here. There is a accessible ramp right there. It continues along. This is a low stone wall proposed. And again, in this area, the recommendation has been to try to soften those 90-degree turns. This is kind of a sensitive area because there were some fruit trees planted by citizen volunteers in this area. And we're trying to navigate through that without limiting the number of trees that need to be removed and replanted, attempted to replant. There are, I think, 6 or 7 trees that would be affected by this particular alignment, but it leaves the fruit trees on both sides. And again, we're trying to restrict ourselves by staying out of the creek bank itself, which simplifies the project both from an engineering perspective and from a permitting perspective. This is around the Little League field backstop. This is during baseball seasons will be a very active area. Not a great place to go bicycling quickly while there are a lot of people around, but that's okay. The pathway continues around. These are log seating arrangements, and this is intended to be kind of possibly an interpretive area. There's also a bicycle rack in that area, I believe, and there may be some others as well in this area. I can't quite call. There will be some minor modifications to some of the baseball facilities. I think that the bullpen is going to be modified slightly. Not exactly sure if we'll need to do that. We are working closely with the stakeholders that have kind of been invested on the ground in this area. It includes Friends of Five Creeks. Eco City Builders is the organization that catalyzed the citizen volunteers in the 90s to do the restoration, much of the restoration in this area, and we want to preserve that as much as possible. I'm of course, Albany Little League, they've been involved, as well as one of the nearby property owners, Daniel Doyle, who does a lot of volunteer work of his own along this stretch of the creek. And then the third segment is again along the right field fence line of the Little League field. I should mention right now, if you come along here, there's a chain link fence for the baseball field. And then there's another chain link fence along that separates the current dirt path from the creek itself, the top of bank. And the idea is to remove this outer chain link fence and put in a nicer split rail fence that's more aesthetically pleasing. And we also are aware that we need to make sure that that fence is placed in a way that's not going to be a hazard to a bicyclist. There again, this is a, where's my mouse? This is a separate small baseball field for the Little League, and there are some bleachers that will be relocated and placed basically in the asphalt area that's over here, and then the bicyclists can ramp down onto 10th Street, and they can either continue straight on the path that goes to San Pablo, go north on 10th towards north into Albany and towards the grocery store, or south through what are now bollards and continue south on into Berkeley. The long-term vision, incidentally, is to fully restore the segment of creek to the south of Belmont Village Housing Project, create a proper ecological restoration with a meander and a flood channel, and most important ecologically is to remove this culvert that's under 10th Street and replace it with a pedestrian bicycle bridge. And that would be a much larger scale project. It would require grant funds, but it's still something that's on the horizon for us. So the treatment of this particular area is hopefully an interim measure for a few years until we can get the grant funding to do make this area even better. And again, I think there are sets of bicycle racks right there in that area. We're continuing to engage the community. In addition to your meeting this evening, we're hoping to get to the Parks and Recreation and what will soon be called the Parks and Recreation and Natural Areas Commission, who will be taking on some of the creek and waterfront issues pursuant to recent city council discussion. So we hope to get to them early next year when their first meetings of the year. So at this point, I will pause and be happy to answer any questions and take your input on the specifics of this design.
Questions from the commissioners? We're all looking at the plans here. Who's had a chance to look and has questions? No? Robert, do you need more time to?
I do, but I can add a quick question in about, it sounds like there was a discussion at this at City Council yesterday, and what were the results of that?
The City Council discussion was a little bit broader. There are three different elements in the City Council discussion. There was this project. There was also the status of a memorandum of understanding and associated budget that has been some funds that the city has received that were originally in an escrow account. And then there's a question with respect to maintenance program for the creek, which also is not necessarily a transportation-related issue, but important for the City Council to give us direction on.
That incorporated maintenance of the path as well?
No, it's more related to vegetation maintenance and exactly what plants and locations and within the creek itself, that's a fairly highly regulated area, and we have to go to regional agencies to get permits to do maintenance of a certain type, so we wanted to get a plan together.
Got it.
Looking back at the west portion, it's really hard for me to see what's going on exactly in this view, but further west on the trail, many of the curb cuts have very vertical curbs adjacent to the ramp. And I think that situation exists here at the left edge of the crossing currently. And I'm concerned that not only would there be a right angle turn there on the east side of this street, of 8th Street, but that you'd also have to negotiate between very vertical 90-degree curb portions.
You're speaking of the flares part of the ramp, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, we'll take a look at that and make it sure that someone coming in and making a turn into it would not catch an edge, basically. Yeah.
I'm asking specifically. I was at one of the early site visits with, I believe, these consultants, and they just didn't seem to get it. And I talked about it being an issue elsewhere on the trail, and I just don't think they were focused on that particular portion.
We will reinforce that.
Thank you.
Issue. Thank you.
Did you have something specific about that?
From my read of the plan, there are no flares. It goes right at the same elevation to a speed table, and it says, at least on the west side, it says trench drain over gutter. So it'd just be
great.
Same elevation all the way through.
Thank you. So we've answered the question. Hopefully.
So there have been comments from the city of Berkeley regarding their standards, and that their standards for speed tables like this require it to be lower, and so they've had, with implementing their standards, instances where it does drop and then have more elevation to it. So there's been some discussion on the Berkeley side that whether they've had one example that they've been able to go in a different direction from the standard and what they would want to see here. So that's still a pending discussion, but it is has been looked at.
Great. Thank you. Other questions? Turning it over to public. I'm sorry.
So the idea, I think it's on the other slide, where there's going to be a lot of traffic, cross traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea is it's just go slower because there's just not enough room there to open it up.
I think we're concerned that there's going to be the potential for pedestrian bicycle conflict. Right. And if anyone has suggestions about how to manage that, that would be great to hear. We're cognizant of the fact that it's a Little League field and there are going to be lots of families and kids kind of running around. So I think some careful consideration to how that's really going to work is important.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Hearing none, I'll turn it over to public comment. Do we have anybody? So we haven't collected slips, so just go ahead and stand up and let's, somebody stand up.
Preston, and well, you can go in any order you want, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be kind of tag team. So maybe you could start with the westernmost of the three. So as far as I can tell, there's no tree on the ends. Well, let's start right at the speed table crossing. It has truncated dome mats at either side. Strollers and rollers are still getting complaints and reports of cyclists who have to cross these things in wet weather crashing. Years ago, I talked to the chair of the state body that came up with this design, and he said they were going to continue with further refinements around friction, but they got defunded by the legislature, and so that's why we're left with what we have. So it's unfortunate that these are required and usually have a very low friction coefficient when they're wet. and that they're required along cycling facilities. Obviously, this is both a cycling and a sidewalk user facility. But I would suggest, particularly because you're asking people to turn across them, which is the most hazardous maneuver to make at the point in which they're wet. You know, it's one thing if you can sort of let go of the brakes and make your way straight across. There are other products out there that are like a cast concrete that I know they use at LBL where I work that would have a higher friction coefficient when wet. So I ask you please pay attention to that detail. To my knowledge, the first hard turn, not the one at the speed table, but the next one further north, it doesn't look like there's any tree on the inside of the path that is trying to be preserved, that is forcing that hard turn. So, and it looks like there's plenty of room to soften it pretty dramatically. So I'd ask for that. If you go to the next slide, there's a hard right angle turn here. There's a tree on the inside of the turn. However, if you look at the demolition plan, there's 6 other trees that are being moved or removed to make way for the path. So I don't know why the nature and geometry of the path should be degraded so to preserve that tree. And again, looks like there's room to soften that turn. Also, the concrete portion of the path has these not right angles, but still hard angles, and it would be better if those were curved as well. As you see, the path has some curve to it over by the bullpen. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, so I would like...
Gurjit, could you... we need to keep it on the mic if possible.
I wanted to also point out that the right angle turns. Well, first of all, I bike there daily. That's actually part of my commute. And not only that, I drop off my kid to the preschool, which is around 4th and Gilman. So actually, I use the path when not wet and muddy. It's very narrow. I understand that. But my kids get very excited when he sees other kids on the field. So, and it's actually much more relaxing than on the, what's the street? Yeah, than the next street, which is kind of crowded with trucks and other bigger vehicles. So yeah, I'm currently a half user of this path, and I do carry my kid with sometimes with a trailer and sometimes with just a bike seat. The trailer does require a lot of footprint when I turn. So I think those right angles there, if we are actually now considering a real trail there, I think we should consider those. Like removing those are easy and making them easier. The other thing is that either when my son is on a bike seat, the center of gravity is higher. So if I'm making a turn and it's wet surface, there is a risk of me falling. I actually had a fall with him on one of the bridges there on the path because when they get wet, they are actually quite slippery. So the material, I think I would pay a little bit attention to that as well. So can I go a little bit more into the actual points coming from east to the west? I have a few suggestions there. I don't understand this area here. So are the cyclists supposed to enter at the north side, turn left, and then make a right angle again to get into the path? Because there seems to be some bike rack there, over here. So the cyclists, I assume they will have to go like that. Is that my understanding of the diagram? Is that correct?
I believe that's at grade right there. The intent is to have it at grade.
And cyclists it's more open on south of the bicycle racks down here where you could come in.
I see, so they can enter directly, if it is at grade, I see, okay. So that's one of my concerns actually removed there. As we move more to the left, to the west, I think these angles here, even though they're not right angle, I think the trailer, there is always the risk of the trailer just tipping there. So I would just make them a little bit more round. The tree here that Preston mentioned, I think I would be more in favor of removing that tree if there is no, I don't know, some emotional attachment to it. Like, I don't know, he's been there for like a century or so, or something like that. So if this path is going to serve us for decades to come, a tree that can be moved or replanted somewhere, I think that's kind of like a minimal impact, my opinion on that. So moving more to the west. So currently what I do when I bike here is that I come here, and there is, how do you call, like a driveway, like a curb
cut.
somewhere here, and there is this dirt path here. I prefer that than entering here because I have a lot more space, and turning there, it's actually easier on my bike. So a recommendation that I have here is why turn here, come down here, and then make these right angle turns when this could be somewhere here and have this easier connection for cyclists or pedestrians. I don't know if that's actually, if there's actually a real need for this crossing to be here and not here. I think that would make it just easier, just crossing the street there, because it would be much easier instead of doing these right angles. And that's what I have. Thanks.
Thank you.
I move to continue the meeting to 10:45.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, guys.
Hi. Thanks for working on this project. I mean, anything that can allow people to ride off-road and walk to more locations, the better. I'm really happy to see the bike racks in the plans. Albany Strollers and Rollers has funded and planned bike racks at schools and parks and the waterfront and business district. And we've got about 300 bike parking spots that we're responsible for. So Jeff and Justin, when you guys are working on the next phase and you're really planning specifics of bike racks, we would definitely like to be able to collaborate on locations so we can get the spacing right and, you know, the location, make sure that long tails can fit in there as people are going to have with their kids, make sure they're at safe locations. We'd also be interested in perhaps helping to fund some of these racks around here once you get to that time. Also, just wanted to mention, I don't know if the people who are responsible for this location might be responsible for Fielding Field, but if so, I've just been having some difficulty finding the person who can install racks at Fielding Soccer Field, and we're emailing 4 different people, and so we've got racks fully funded there, but we can't really find who installs it. So if in your travels you find that person, please send them my way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, just want to say this is a great project. I'm really glad it's happening. I was a league board member for the local soccer league, and there are anywhere up to 1,000 kids, parents, coaches, et cetera, that use those 4 soccer fields on a Saturday, for example. And this is a great way to get a lot of them down there on bikes instead of parking, and it's super congested down there and parking. So it's a great, great project. I'm really, really glad it's happening. I'd like to echo some of the same concerns about the corners. The hard turns are really not appropriate for bikes. I think this whole thing could be done better. I'm not quite sure how, but it just seems awkward to me. It just seems like maybe a few more design alternatives just to see how the flow could be better. Little confused by why this sidewalk, I mean, this is basically sidewalk, right? But then you're throwing this is somewhere between an urban sidewalk and a bike path, and just seems like a little confused here. You might have pedestrians. It just seems like things are getting a little blurry there for me. And definitely making this a softer curve. And then I'm also just curious, what if people want to turn this way? They want to turn right there. There doesn't really seem to be a provision for that, except by going down to the crosswalk, which seems really awkward, basically doing a U-turn. Could you go to the next slide, please? The next, yeah. This seems, yeah, definitely I agree with everybody else. Trees need to be either moved or removed, and this needs to be just made into a gentle curve. Another big concern, a lot of times when you have paving and it changes material, that's an indication that there's some kind of different use. So I think there should be a consistent paving for this bike through path that's separate from what would be used for the kids at the baseball field, for example. So, you know, that it's consistent all the way through and people know that that's for bikes and pedestrians. I think that would be an important design consideration. And I'm really also concerned about how much you would get interference between pedestrians and cyclists at the Little League field. So keeping that clear would be really important. I think removing real hard edges, I think these should be removed from the path or pulled away because it's either a trip hazard if there's some sort of bike and pedestrian interface that's, you know, people are running into each other. Something, it's just a little natural overflow if you have a little extra space on the sides of the path. And then I'm also a runner, so I would appreciate a dirt path as much as possible along the whole trail. I think that would be a fantastic place to run next to the creek. And you could get a lot of runners there too. So some little extra space, it doesn't take much more than about 15 inches of
if you could wrap up
dirt would be great. And then the other, could you go one more slide? If I could go over a little bit. Just also this area just seems a little awkward. You know, getting people pulling the bikes. Maybe it's not the best location for bike racks if you've got a lot of people going through there. And in the plan, I guess I'm a little confused by this area. What that's for. And then, you know, as much as possible, moving hard fences or hard edges away from the path again would be very helpful. So, but otherwise, I think it's great. I'm just really thrilled to see this happening. So, thank you all for your work on it.
All right. Everybody out there has had a chance to speak, and now it's the Commission's turn. Who's interested in going first?
I'll go first. Well, congratulations, Jeff, on anticipating all the soften the corner comments and already acknowledging you're going to do that. I also kind of looked at the west end, the connection to 8th Street, and thought about, you know, what if someone's going to or from the north? How do we get them on the path without having to make sort of the circuitous U-turn? So certainly something to consider, you know, maybe a second curb cut or whatever, some facilitation there. Generally, I know this is a really tight area, so you're doing the best you can to fit what you can fit. And I think with the comments, you know, hopefully we can refine some, but certainly is a great thing to be able to do.
Who's next? No?
Good project.
What he said.
Take staff's considerations, yeah. Public comments, taken into consideration.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to this connection. I understand that the program of this is so constrained in this area, and I appreciate all the compromises that have been made. And any suggestions I make are with that in mind. And I don't have any comments on this section. I don't fully understand it, but it doesn't feel like a big problem. I understand there's going to be a zone of mixing of maybe people standing around watching a ball game and people trying to get through at certain times, and certain times not. if we look at the middle diagram, my take on this area is that it's really going to be an area of alertness, and it's not the lycra clad going through here. This is a connection of the most relaxed route along Codornices Creek. But when I think about right angle turns, I'm obviously going to slow down, but also I'm paying attention to the path at that point, and I'm not paying attention, or I have less attention for the other users of the path. So for me, if the serpentineness has to increase, that's okay. That'll encourage slowness. But that kind of arc will help me, and hopefully other users perhaps less able, to pay less attention to the path and more attention to the other users who might be coming the other direction or overtaking you or might be on foot. So that's just a slightly different reaction to the right angles. I kind of understand why they're there, but I think they're going to be extremely difficult. So maybe that's a different way to think about it. Looking at the...
Can I add one comment in on the baseball field? Aren't there, I was looking, there's a yield to pedestrian sign so we can put up in that location for the cyclists to yield to pedestrians when there's lots of activity there?
You're saying you think that should be included?
Yeah. I don't know if they're right. I didn't see them, so.
Yeah, is there any signage associated with?
There's been some discussion of yield when, or signage for when baseball fields are active. I don't think they're in the plans yet. There's been some discussion at the meetings.
Or you just always yield to pedestrians,
sign them.
Right? I mean,
it's definitely a shared environment, and maybe there's some kind of different signage at the ends that really alerts people to that. Is there a name of the grove that's being enlarged a bit for the path?
Not that I'm familiar with.
I don't know, maybe you could take that and make it the blah-blah-blah shared access zone, or, if we could go to the westernmost view. If you look, when you transition from the, I don't know, the sort of the gray swoop that comes down from the right to the left down to 8th Street, there's actually a removable bollard that's a black dot there, which I'm curious as to why it's needed on this end and not the other end, and is that what's driving the right angle at that location? It's another obstacle. Could the bollard be moved towards the roadway, out of the path, or to the edge of the path? And if the bollard is to prevent motorized vehicles from accessing the path, is it the best alternative for that? There's already, I guess there's currently a speed hump. I guess it's moving to the raised crosswalk. Is that the plan?
That's correct.
Okay. And the purpose of the raised crosswalk is to double as a speed impediment. Is there any reason the raised crosswalk couldn't be more diagonal? And golly, those raised crosswalks and speed humps that are diagonal are much more effective as speed humps. But it's also probably a bus line entry.
It is a bus route. We did discuss the potential of a longer table on an angle. The Berkeley staff was not in favor of that direction. The other thing that we have discussed to some extent is leaving the existing speed bump and doing this at grade, and maybe you'd have more flexibility with stop bars or where you have the crossing come in and out. Would be the other alternative.
Did they specifically react negatively to a longer straight table with a diagonal crosswalk on top, or to a diagonal longer table?
I believe both were not seen as viable.
All right. That would seem to eliminate issues, but yeah. I don't think there's space for most of the length of this path to add a jogging path. That, based on my previous conversations and the plans that I'm seeing, but the idea of moving the hardscape back a little bit where possible is valuable, and I think there are some strong reasons why the fences are as close as they are. I do think they have those things in mind. Any other comments from the commission? Can I get? Oh, we're just providing comments tonight. So with that, I think we'll close it. And we're at 10:45, which was when we were continued to, and we still have announcements. So can I get a continuation for maybe 10 minutes? Does that seem appropriate, staff? Is that enough?
I think we only have one announcement.
5 minutes?
Move to
There's also the
Second.
advisory panel.
That was our
That
announcement.
is the announcement. I'll move to continue to 10:50.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're continuing.
Please reapply.
Done.
How many of us have reapplied? Okay,
I'm
well,
behind.
if you wish to continue, please reapply.
Yes.
And if there may be a delay to filling out the form or whatever, at least let your council member know that you are interested in, so they don't select someone off the list, without realizing that you want to continue to serve.
It's a quick form. So we continued the pavement project until January, and our next meeting is on Thursday, January 24th. With that, if there are no objections, I will close the meeting.